share any thoughts that they have as well. So that'll come after the presentation. If there is something in the slides that you have a question at the time that we don't answer, we could pause for a second, but it'd probably be best to save the questions till the end if possible. But it will be pretty informal. And what we'll do is we'll have Eric Nelson, our Director of Business Services, he'll go through the slides, and then I'll also have some commentary, and we'll go through them really as quickly as we can. We'll be in thorough. So Eric, why don't you go ahead and take it away. You'll need your microphone, and then hopefully your clicker will advance the slides.
Thank you. We'll get started with school district finances are influenced by a lot of different factors, including state law, state mandates, enrollment trends, property valuations, capital needs, grants, and staffing costs. So as you can see here, the district operates a lot of different funds. Probably the most commonly referred to is the general fund, which is Fund 10. There's a fund for special ed, for food service, community service fund, etc. And so for the 25-26 school year, the total budget across all funds is projected to be approximately $64 million. So key dates in the budgeting process, January is a key point in this process. A couple of things happened during that month. We received the second Friday membership count, and we hold this mid-year budget hearing. So the information we review tonight helps inform us of early projections for the 26-27 budget, which the board will see preliminary versions of in February and May before the final adoption of the budget. So Wisconsin school finance is governed by revenue limits, and those date back all the way back to the early 1990s. Because the SDMA's per pupil spending was below the state average when revenue limits were established, the district continues to operate as a relatively low revenue district. So these funding mechanisms, of course, since the early 90s have changed. The revenue limit remains the primary constraint of our operating budget.
I think it's important to point out here, and I think most board members already understand this, that when the revenue limits were put in place, the idea was to have that revenue limit continue to increase based on inflation. And that has not happened. And that's really why you see so many referendums across the state of Wisconsin, because school districts are not provided enough revenue limit authority to keep up with inflation. We know that inflation has been high. It's not as high as it had been the last few years. At the same time, when you talk about staffing expenses, when you talk about the cost of goods, when you go to the grocery store, everyone knows that the price of everything is higher, but the revenue that we're allowed to generate here in the school district has not kept up. So what schools have had to do is they've had to make cuts, reduce programming, reduce staffing, or go to referendum to allow for more revenue. We did have an operating referendum in Menominee a couple of years ago. It did not pass, so additional cuts were made, and unfortunately that continues to be the situation. Now the governor did use his veto authority and provided for an annual increase to the revenue limit, but it's only $325 per student, and when you look at our per student costs, that's not enough to keep up with inflation either.
So yeah, Joe just mentioned the revenue limit per pupil adjustments for 25-26 was $325. So that makes our low revenue ceiling $11,679 per student. So notably, the state equalization aid was not increased in the most recent biennial budget. As a result, a greater share of school funding pressure continues then to shift to local taxpayers. Special education, categorical aid, that also remains an area of uncertainty. The budget had a 42% reimbursement rate for the school. We budgeted, since it always comes in lower, at 40%. Early DPI projected a prorated reimbursement at 35%. Now, normally they come out with that in December. That's usually lower than it ends up being at the end. so it might more likely fall between 38 and 40% in 25-26. But again, that's a symptom of funding some certain rather than some sufficient that we've talked about before. So at 42%, the SDMA would receive a reimbursement of $3.1 million. At 35%, we would receive only 2.6. So you can see the widely diverging difference there between 42% and 35%. So about each percentage of difference is worth about $75,000 in that.
So that's what keeps Eric up at night. You know, there's a $500,000 swing right there, and it's really going to depend how receipts come in terms of special education costs and how far the appropriation is going to go and what percentage school districts will actually get. And, you know, we're in the midst of the year that we're going to be funded, so it really is tricky. A couple other things about this slide that I want to mention. I did write a school crossings column, and I assume everyone had a chance to read it. When we get our tax bills, I mean, it's never a pleasant thing getting a tax bill. We all know that. And what's really kind of frustrating for me as a superintendent is when you look at the tax bill and it makes it look like the school district has raised all this new money. And I think the average taxpayer sees the tax bill and they think, oh, the school's getting a lot of new money. That's not the case. Like we said, we did not even receive enough new revenue to keep up with inflation. But the way the tax bill is, it does not explain two critical components. One is the fact that because there was no new state aid, all this new $325 per student essentially goes on to the property tax levy. Now, it's not quite that simple, but that's kind of generalized across the state. All that new money goes into property taxes. And then the other piece is the vouchers piece. And we're going to talk about the voucher piece in the regular meeting as well. We have Chris from the Wisconsin Public Education Network. There's been a lot of work being done, and some schools or some communities across the state are actually starting to list the voucher cost. Over $1 million of our tax levy has to go towards paying private school vouchers. So the average taxpayer in Menominee might see their tax bill and think the school district is getting all this money. But two things. One, there was no new state aid. And two, $1 million from our community is going towards private school vouchers. And that's a big concern.
Now, next to enrollment. So this graph, I think in the past I probably had just general enrollment. So how many students do we have? This is actually a 3-year rolling average FTE, which means it's what the state metric, it's the metric that the state uses to allocate funds. So I thought this would be a little bit more of an accurate representation of enrollment as how it affects the finances of SDMA. So again, this is a 3-year rolling average, and FTE means, you know, like 4K would be counted as 40% rather than 100% per student. So as you can see here, we've been level for a while, and then it's projected that it could drop off a bit, starting, it looks like in 28-29 school year and going beyond. This is not a Menominee exclusive problem. This is a problem that has been going on throughout the state of lower enrollment in school districts. A lot of other school districts are facing this possible issue.
So this graph shows both. So this graph shows both history and projection. What's the most recent year in, of the recorded history versus the projection from the state demographics?
So it would be 25-26 would be the measurement that was in, so in our revenue limit worksheet, that was the number that was in that.
Okay.
So the rest are projected.
Then this is based on, there's that projection you get of state demographics.
Well, it's not to say state demographics. It really has more to do with when we project forward our kindergarten class and first grade on. But Eric does also use what's called a survival factor, because we know there are certain grade levels where we receive students back. Like 9th grade would be a big one, where students might be in a private school K through 8. There's a couple of those little factors there where we do see an increase, and Eric has tried to factor those in as well. I think it's important to note that even though it looks like a pretty drastic drop, really, the scale on this goes from 3240 to 3380. So when we look from the top enrollment, which is this year, 2025, 2026, at 3,363 student FTE, the final mark, the lowest mark is 3287. So it's not a real wide gap, and that could change pretty dramatically based on a few families moving in, but it also could change pretty dramatically with a few families moving out. But the fact of the matter is enrollment is declining. We're not seeing the decline like nearly as what some other schools are. At the same time, since our revenue limit is based on your 3-year rolling average of FTE, we can expect that our funding will decrease over the next 5 years. And I think that's the big takeaway. Now, Eric is going to be attending, there's a working group in our region that is studying declining enrollment and what school districts can do to try to manage declining enrollment, especially with the funding piece. There is a declining enrollment exemption, so as your enrollment declines, you're held harmless for a short while, but then that also, you end up paying it back on the back end. So this is going to be an issue that impacts our revenue limit and impacts our finances into the foreseeable future.
And so we move on to what makes up our tax levy, and you can see here, Fund 10 makes up most of it, and then the referendum approved debt is also a larger portion of it, and then a smaller portion of it is what we call Fund 80, or the Community Service Tax Levy. So again, this makes up the total levy then, which was $18.8 million.
Eric, I think it's important to point out that these are the real large buckets. When we talk about the private school vouchers, for instance, that would actually be in the Fund 10 bucket, the 13.9 million.
Correct.
So even though it's 13.9 million in general fund, $1 million of that is going towards private school vouchers, and 4.5 million, 5 million is going towards funding special education, Fund 27, because funding for special education is not sufficient, and we'll get to more of that in a minute.
Correct, yeah. And then if we look at the SDMA tax rate history, we can see that has been in decline. So in 2021, it was $7.71. And then in 25-26, we were able to have it be the same as 24-25, so it's remained stable at $5.60. This is otherwise known as the mill rate or the tax rate, and you can see throughout the 5 years how it's gone.
A real important piece of this graph is how each bar is color coded. And you can see that the gray portion of that bar, that is the general fund portion of the tax levy. The red portion is the amount of the tax levy that is used to pay off the long-term debt. And then the blue bar is the small fraction that's used for the Fund 80 community service programs. Where this is going to be important is when we get to these future slides, we have a slide that talks about our long-term debt payments. You can see that operating-wise, really it's only about $4 on the rate. And we really don't have that much longer to pay off long-term debt. So I think the board's going to want to think about that. And I don't think there's going to be any decisions in the next 12 months, but I think in the next 18 to 24 months, probably have some decisions to make in terms of how we want to manage our tax levy and the mill rate in our school district.
And then when we compare our tax rate or our mill rate to the others in our region, you can see that we're one of the lowest. So the average for this group is $6.78. And again, ours is at $5.60. Only Durand, Arkansas, and Elk Mound have a lower mill rate. The statewide average was over $7 statewide. So our region was lower than state average, and then Menominee Area School Districts was even lower than that comparison group.
And there's a number of reasons why our rate is one of the lowest in the region. Some of it has to do with district property demographics. We are a positively aided school district, which means that the amount of property value that's in our school district in the SDMA is lower compared to some other school districts that have a higher property value per student. especially when you look at some of the school districts that might have, some real nice lake property and things like that with real high valuation or low student enrollment and that type of vacation home property value, that can be a real challenge. But then another big piece are the number of school districts that have passed referendums. Almost all of these school districts in our region have passed a referendum, and that allows them to have a revenue limit that's higher than what's imposed by the state, whereas in Menominee, we do not have that.
So next we move on to property values. The property values this year was $3.3 billion. Last year it was $3.1 billion. So the valuations are certified every October 1st. The state average property increase was 7.69%. Within the district of Menominee, the increase was 5.31, and of that 5.31, 2% of that was from new construction.
So when people get their tax bills, certainly how their property is assessed impacts what their property tax bill is. If everything goes up, then there'd be no change, but we know that different municipalities, with different construction and everything, it changes, it doesn't all change at the same rate. So that's why there may be fluctuations in the individual tax bills for different municipalities. But I think it's important, a couple things that Eric, that he said that I wanted to highlight. One is the property growth in Menominee was less than the statewide average. That's important. Another piece is that of that 5.31% of new property value, only 2.1% of it was new construction. I think some people think that almost all of the new property value is from new construction. Realistically, it's usually less than half.
Next we go to equalization aid. So this is the money that we receive from the state. If you recall, earlier in the presentation, this was that the state was going to put no more new money in for 25-26. Menominee was a little bit of an outlier in that we actually received a little more equalization aid. Most schools, probably about 75% of schools in the state had less equalization aid. So my projections show that for 26-27, that is probably going to go down probably to around the 24-25 level. That's for 26-27. That the equalization aid will probably go down to the 24-25 level, or about 25.9 million.
In this slide here, this is something that the school board talks about usually in June and July. And the school board deserves a huge pat on the back for doing a great job managing the district's finances. If you recall, at the end of the last fiscal year, the board made a transfer into the capital improvement fund, Fund 46. That was a way to move dollars out of Fund 10 in a way that those dollars are still available for fixing our roofs and our boilers and our other capital needs. So it's still in that account, it's still able to be used, but by making that transfer, that was counted as a shareable expense, which allowed our school district to capture more state aid this school year. It's really pretty remarkable when you think of it, that the pie of state aid stayed the same, and even though we did not have a referendum, we still were able to capture more state aid and really maximize for our taxpayers those dollars. So great job by the board.
Next we'll go to the voucher program impact that we'll hear more about later on tonight. But the voucher program continues to be a growing cost pressure. You can see, so in the first part, that's the cost breakdown, what a private voucher school receives per student, K through 8, 9 through 12, and then special ed funding as well. And then the 1.3 million is the total cost to SDMA, or the total amount that was levied to increase to pay for those voucher programs. And you can see the percentage increases year over year for that. So from 24-25 to 25-26, there was a 41% increase. I believe last year it was just short of $1 million, and then this year was 1.3 million.
So in our school district, we're not even receiving enough new revenue limit authority to manage 3% inflation. Yet the private school voucher program went up 41.2% in our school district. Our mill rate, our tax rate stayed the same, despite the fact that 41.2% increase in the private school voucher program in Menominee. It's very challenging.
So for school district debt, through refinancing and prepayment, the SDMA has reduced future interest costs by 1.35 million since 2022. And so this is really going to help us long-term, our long-term finances in the future, which will be shown by the next graph, which is, so this is the Fund 38 and Fund 39 payments. So the blue bars represent current payment schedule. So this is the amount we currently are owed on our debt or are going to pay on our debt. That's our payment schedule. The red lines, however, represent what was going to be our payment schedule before we did these defeasances and prepayments of debt. So as you can see, the difference between the red bar and the blue bar represents cost savings to the taxpayer of interest, because we were able to prepay some of these loans off.
And that's what I was referring to earlier. You know, it's pretty small, it's hard to see on the screen, especially if you're in the back. But when we get to the 2030, 2031 school year, you can see that that blue bar drops way down. And it's really at that point that the tax levy in the school district, it could be a challenge for the board to manage that. I don't think anybody likes to see their property tax bounce up and down, up and down. I think most people would rather have something that's a little more stable. So as we look to the future and as we think about how we want to manage this long-term debt, I think the board may want to consider at that point if there is any additional way to look at a referendum or look at some other means to manage that so we don't end up having a bounce in our tax levy and our mill rate.
Okay, and then we have just the Fund 80 tax levy history. So this is the amount levied for Fund 80. So the levy has increased modestly over time, reflecting the expanded programming, more participation, and really just being a relatively small portion overall of the tax levy. Next is the federal grant funding. So this includes Title and Carl Perkins grants. And as you can see from the percentages, except for Title III, which was reduced into the double digits, the rest have remained relatively stable. Title I being reduced 4.2%, and like I said, Title III 11.6%.
This graph here, I want to point out, goes from 2020 to current. So you can see that it's been relatively stable. There was a little bit of an increase, which is now dropping back down to 2020 levels. There is a lot of concern about the future of federal funding. It's still very uncertain. Right now, what we are hearing is that at least for the next year, we would probably anticipate the federal funding remaining relatively stable. But I think it's the following year and the years after that that is probably most concerning. But we'll continue to, study exactly what we can expect.
Can you quickly remind us what Title III is for?
I believe.
Brian, why don't you answer that? Use your microphone.
Title III is for language learners.
Thank you.
Okay, and then the next one is federal IDEA funding. As you can see, no surprises here, relatively flat to a little bit lower for flow through, and then preschool remains flat.
And for anybody not used to the acronyms, this is special education funding.
And then, Fund 27 transfers, so at the end of the year, at the end of the fiscal year, Fund 27, which is for special education, has to be balanced. And in order to make it balanced, there has to be a transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 so that it is balanced at the end of the year. You can see then that this is the amount that is transferred out of the general fund into Fund 27. And that's a state mandated requirement that Fund 27 needs to be balanced. So you can see here it's grown from 2020 all the way to 2025. Again, we're expected to get a little bit more of a reimbursement, and that is projected, the 4.1 for this year. I believe that is assuming a 40% reimbursement, which again is a little bit, might be a little bit high. So this number for 25-26 will in all likelihood be a little bit higher than what it shows there.
And this is what we talked about before, and Eric, if you could actually slide back just one. So special education funding really comes from two sources, from the federal government and from the state government. And you can see here that the federal government, the funding has been relatively flat, actually a little bit of a downward curve, slight downward curve. So now if you move back forward, so that was the federal portion, and then this is the local and state portion. And because there's not enough dollars coming from the state, this is the local portion that has to come out of the general fund to supplement the cost of special education. The cost of special education is one area in education that is rising, one of the most rapidly rising costs. And a lot of that has to do with the specialized services that students need, whether they are medically fragile students or whether they are students with disabilities, either for learning or for behaviors. And the cost of serving those students is real high. We have a great special education program here. We're very proud of our special education program. Tonya and her team does a remarkable job ensuring that all the mandated services are provided. But that's just it, they're mandated services that has to come first. So when we look at how we fund things, there really is not much for control when we talk about special education. So it's really the general education programming that has to be cut in order to have this supplement work.
Okay, so on to salaries and benefits. Salaries and benefits account for approximately 73% of our total expenses. Our self-insured health insurance fund remains financially strong. We proposed a portion of that success go to employees through a one-time wellness incentive program that we've created. And so, we were able to propose doing that without creating a reoccurring budget obligation.
I guess I do want to point something out that we have one of the youngest staffs in the region. And we're very proud of our staff. Our teachers are doing a remarkable job with our students. Even though we have one of the less experienced staffs, they are very, very talented. And there are some real benefits to that. It's important to note though, as educators continue to get more experience and more credentials, the cost will go up. I would expect that the cost of the same exact staff that we have now will probably be about a third higher in the next decade or so. And now it all depends on how things go in terms of teacher shortages and the staffing demographics that we have. But what I'm trying to say is that we are getting a major bang for our buck right now with our staff. And we can't count on that same staffing expense being the way it is forever. In our strategic plan, we have a goal to have our staffing expenses be between 70 and 80% of our expenses. And right now, you can see it's around 73. I would expect that percentage to go up as the years move on. And that's going to take more of the budget, and that's something that we need to be aware of.
So Fund 73 is the post-employment benefits. it's used to manage like I said, post-employment benefits, including, health insurance and HRAs. The fund remains well positioned. You can see the liability, the OPEB liability is 3.5 million, the total pension liability is 1.1, and then the fund balance there is to, meet those liabilities.
And this is another thing that the board deserves huge credit for. 12 years ago, we were underwater by about $30 million with our post-employment benefit fund. And right now, you can see that we're projected to be fully funded. Now, it's not a real simple calculation. There's an actuarial study done every year. So we can't say that we're gonna be fully funded forever. However, the way that we handle our post-employment benefits, we pre-fund them. So it's not that we're making promises and then figuring out how to fund it. We are pre-funding it every single year. It does put pressure on each annual budget, but we are not kicking the can down the road and creating a big liability. And I think that's something that the board has done a really nice job with.
Next is Fund 46, which is our capital improvement fund. We were able to put more money into this during 24-25, so you can see it raised a little bit, or actually quite a bit in that year. And then you can see it slowly goes down, projected based on our projects that are due until we get to 2030, 31, which is quite a steep drop. So this fund obviously cannot be, negative or go into negative. But based on the projects we have slated for 30-31, that's the difference in the fund based on what we have in it, so.
And this graph actually looks better than it did last year. If you recall, I think we only projected it was gonna be solvent for about another 2 years. But again, Kevin's gonna talk about Fund 46 during the regular meeting. This is based on projection of when things would be projected to need to be replaced. And we don't replace things just because they're on schedule. For instance, the typical life of a boiler, Kevin, is what, 20 years?
25, yeah.
Okay, so in our plan, it might be scheduled to be replaced in 20 years, but because of the maintenance that Kevin and his team does, and also some of his luck, a lot of times we're able to get more out of our boilers, same with our roofs. So this really is a projection. When you start going out 30 years, this graph doesn't go out 30 years, but our plan does. There's an awful lot that's going to change. But the fact of the matter is, we need to know that a ton of work in our school district was done in after 2013. That was when we had a capital referendum that was passed. And we didn't build a new school or anything like that, but we were able to do roofs and boilers and HVAC systems and all that stuff. The challenge is when you do so much work at once, a lot of the maintenance is going to come due at once. So when we start looking 20 years out from 2013, things that hadn't been totally replaced or things that were replaced are going to start to fail or need to be fixed. That's where these major expenses are going to come. A lot of our priority the last couple of years has been at the high school pool, but there are so many other projects, and again, Kevin will talk about those tonight. But we're good for several years here, but the problem is that we need to continue to plan. With the cuts that we had to make to our budget when the operating referendum failed, we are no longer able to include a contribution to our capital improvement fund in our annual budget. Now, our staff does a great job, and if we are able to have more revenue than expenses at the end of the year, we will recommend that the board make a transfer to Fund 46, just like we did last year. But in terms of having a regular payment, that is no longer the case. For years, we were able to put about $1 million a year into the fund. That had to be cut from the budget because of the failed referendum.
And then the next slide just simply shows fund balance, as you can see, remains stable throughout the 5-year period shown here.
The graph shows a red portion and a blue portion of the fund balance. There is part of the fund balance that is designated, and most of that has to do with the fact that we have a self-insured health insurance policy. So that's something else that we'll continue to keep an eye on, because those dollars that are in the fund balance designated for health insurance have to be used for health insurance. You can see right now that there isn't much of that to be the case, and that's because the health insurance fund was depleted over the last several years. However, as we have built that fund up, I would expect more of the fund balance to be designated than what we have right now.
And then finally, the last slide shows the ending fund balance projected throughout the years, along with projected deficits for that. So we predict a balanced budget in 25-26, but then as you can see, slight deficits continuing into 2029 and 2030.
And there is so much to unpack on this slide, we could spend an hour talking about it, but what I'd like to point out is this slide looks a lot better than it did a year ago, and it looks a lot better than it did a couple of years ago. A big part of that is because Downsville Elementary School was closed last year, you all know that. That was a significant change in the future budgeting and projections that we have. It's almost $1 million a year. So you can see that instead of the red line on the bottom, that's the annual budget, how it ends. You can see that we are projecting deficits, but those deficits don't get too large until you get to 2029, 2030. And as the deficits get larger, you can see the blue bars, that's the fund balance. The fund balance starts to get depleted quicker and quicker. The real trigger point for me is the area that's shaded in yellow. That's the amount of fund balance that we feel is needed in order to maintain cash flow in the school district. And again, we've talked about that before. We only receive our state payments and our property tax payments periodically throughout the school year. So in terms of making payroll and paying bills, they don't all come at the same time either. Payroll is pretty consistent, but a lot of the bills come right at the beginning of the school year when a majority of the supplies are being purchased. So you have to have cash on hand in order to maintain your business. And we figure about a little over 11 million is what's needed, and that's that yellow shaded area. So right now, we're projecting that we should maintain enough cash flow where short-term borrowing or using a line of credit will not be needed through 2029, 2030, but that will continue to change, and all of this will continue to change based on state policies and state budgets. We know that we're in the first year of a state budget, so we have a pretty good idea of what state funding will be for next year, 2026, 2027. But when we start talking about 2027 and beyond, really a lot can change depending on what is approved down in Madison.
And we thank you for your support.
So now's a great time for any questions or comments. Rachel, you can manage that however you'd like.
Sorry, go ahead, Margaret.
Okay, I'd like, could you come to the microphone, Margaret? Please.
Yeah.
I have some questions concerning the vultures. I thought, is this on? What is this?
Okay, it's my it says that we have 1.3 million, almost 1.4 million that are paid off our vouchers. Now, it's my understanding that just goes straight on the tax levy. Yeah, so it isn't.
Kind of, it's not that simple, and we can probably talk more about that in the regular meeting. But Eric, do you want to comment on that now at all?
Yeah, it's placed on top of the total levy. So you have the levy for the public school, but then you have that voucher money placed on top of the total levy, and then it's broken out.
Okay, I'm really concerned about the special ed. You said that we get about 35% reimbursement. And yet I'm seeing over 16 million for voucher schools. And if I remember things correctly, if the actual cost in voucher schools is more than that 16 million, they can apply for exception and get even more. So I'm just wondering, how does, when we get 35% reimbursement, About how much is that per student as an average? Is it close to the 16 million or what?
You don't have that figure with you, Eric, do you?
I don't, the 16, so the voucher that you refer to, I think that might be 16,000 per.
Yeah, 16,000 per
Per
student.
student.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know what that shakes out to as far as in no, I don't have that information.
Well, it seems so unfair.
I agree.
And,
Hello.
and what I remember too, if we go back about 5 years, voucher supporters were saying it really doesn't cost us anything because we get to count those students for state aid reimbursement. But then when I looked at that, the state aid reimbursement per student was much less than we're paying in the vouchers. And it's going up so much faster than inflation. And it seems like anything you might say to our politicians doesn't matter because they don't care.
Thank you.
But I would, Eric, I would be interested in knowing what it comes out to per student, if you could look at our total and how many students in that.
Okay. Thanks, Margaret.
I have a question about I have a question about the projection on the very last slide. So this is basically about the expenses side.
Eric, can you put that slide up? It's the last one
It's
with
the
the,
fund balance and deficit projection. Like I said, a lot goes into this slide. There's one thing you mentioned earlier, Joe, which was that over a decade you expect staffing costs to increase by about a third because people move up the pay scale, maybe healthcare costs increase, et cetera. I'm curious if that factor of our budgeted expenses are accounted for in this projection, which goes out 5 years.
there is some increase to staffing expenses in the projection models. I don't think it gets that precise. I think it's more of a cast forward.
So this graph is, it's a reasonable guess, but it sounds like it may actually be a little bit optimistic, assuming our kind of staffing costs project cast into the future, but don't account for people aging and moving up the pay scale.
Yeah, so it would account for approximately, I think, a 3% increase per year. And that, yeah, it's just a projection and just kind of a flat increase projection. So yeah, it could be a lot higher than that for sure.
Yeah, and the reason I was thinking about that is you made on that slide where you counted about the over 10 years, the salary and benefits slide a few back. That salary and benefits is currently approximately 73% of the expenses. I think that's for Fund 10 expenses, right? So, if we increase that by a third, right, it means that in 10 years, if that Fund 10 revenue is not increasing, then all of our expenses are staff, benefits and salaries, and there's nothing else. So that's one way of looking at it, like we have this constrained cap over that timeline, which is gonna get tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter each year.
And it's unfortunate because what happens then is either, because most of our expenses is staffing, it's kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul. You need to reduce the number of staff members to pay the remaining staff members, or you have to eliminate programs, which is opportunities for kids. Unfortunately, that's been the way public education has worked in Wisconsin, at least in my 20 years as a superintendent.
And then one last comment on the last slide. You mentioned that, there has been savings which made this deficit projection better than it was a year ago, 2 years ago. I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier in the discussion but didn't highlight here is also, we used to put 800K into the Fund 47. Sorry, Fund 46. And so that's another, that would be another bump down that red line, almost an entire line on this graph. So there haven't, it's closer to level, but it's taken a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice to chip it that close to being break even.
Essentially, we've deferred maintenance. I mean, because of the way we've managed maintenance and the way we've managed Fund 46, the deferral we might not feel the pain of the deferral immediately, But the fact is, we are deferring $1 million a year of maintenance. So yes.
Ellen, do you have anything you want to ask about?
Are there any final questions on the mid-year budget hearing from folks in the community to the audience tonight? Yeah, go ahead.
My question is also on the vouchers, and I guess it's kind of a similar question, but, so that, it's pretty equal to what our revenue limit is per student, right? Because it was like 10,800 for elementary and 13,000 for, was it high school?
Yeah, I believe our revenue limit is 11,679.
So they get that full amount, and then they can charge their tuition on top of that, or whatever.
Well, so the students have to, the students that are considered choice have to meet certain income, the families have to meet certain income requirements, and they apply to the state to become choice students. So private schools are a mix of choice students and then tuition paying students. So the private schools charge tuition to those that don't qualify for choice, and then those that do qualify for choice is the state parts of this.
So they're getting those amounts though.
Yes.
For choice student, yes.
But to be fair, I do think it's important, and I wanna make sure we point this out. The school district's budget is not reduced when we pay out a voucher, because we are able to continue to levy for that voucher amount. However, we are losing students, which impacts the revenue limit. But the real issue to me is that our tax levy that says school district in the Menominee area is inflated by $1.3 million. So when people get their tax bills in our school district, it says, Menominee schools went up 4% or whatever it is. Well, 1.3 million and an increase of 41.2% over year is because of private school vouchers. And I just don't think there's transparency, and that's why I'm really excited about the next part of our meeting.
I lost my train of thought. So I do have one other question, and just to maybe clarify, for something that I think is really misunderstood by a lot of people, is like teachers' benefits after they retire. They get a pension, correct? And then is there any continuation of healthcare after they retire?
Teachers in Menominee are no longer allowed to stay on the school district's health insurance plan. There is a local retirement benefit, but it's nothing like it used to be. It used to be that, teachers might retire and maybe be able to have full family health insurance until they reach Medicaid or Medicare. That's not the case anymore. There is a stipend that's provided, that's pre-funded as part of the compensation package. But it's not enough to pay for full family health insurance.
If you wanted to say something quick, and then we'll wrap up the budget hearing.
The only thing I wanted to say is, to what you said, I think you said it a little different than I'm gonna say it. But let's say there's a private school and it charges $4,000 tuition for a year, and they get $13,000 for that student. It looks to me like they're making a profit. Now, they will tell you, private schools, they're not making a profit, because they're turning that money right back into what they're doing, probably paying their teacher salaries or whatever. So, I just wanted you to know that.
I thought another question. So is it Catholic school, St. Joseph's Catholic School, and Summit Academy, are those the only two schools that get the funding?
St. Paul's is a voucher school as well.
All right, and folks who think of additional questions later are always welcome to reach out to the board members, to Dr. Zadowski, to Eric Nelson. And I hope that folks who are here will continue to stay through our regular meeting. Right now, I'll call for a motion to adjourn our mid-year budget hearing. So moved. Great. We stand adjourned, and I would suggest we move straight into our regular board meeting. And I apologize to folks who come for the regular board meeting, we are starting a few minutes late. All right, so it is 5:52 and we'll call the meeting to order. Oh, I see. Thanks for being here for our regular board meeting, January 12th, 2026. And we'll start with roll call.
Amy Riddle Swanson,
Here.
Abe Smith,
Here.
Dominique Stewart,
Here.
Rachel Henderson,
Here.
Dale Dalkey,
Here.
Amber Kirsting,
Here.
Emily Hines,
Here.
Michelle Dupree,
Here.
Angela Wolf.
Great, we have a quorum. Let's stand for the pledge of allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And our mission statement. The school district of the Menominee area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Do we have any proposed changes to the agenda order tonight? All right, seeing none, we have no recommendations and commendations this evening, so we'll move straight into our January 2026 highlight on youth.
Okay, I think Mr. Kennedy is here. Mr. Kennedy, if you want to come on up. Brian, would you maybe just switch places with him for a minute, please? Mr. Kennedy is the principal at River Heights Elementary School. And as you know, our principals are rotating through and providing the highlight on youth, not just for River Heights, but for the entire school district. So Mr. Kennedy, thank you for being here, and go ahead and take it away.
Great, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to go over our highlight on youth for the month of January. It's a month that, leading up to now, has been a little shorter on instructional days, but certainly not short on activities going on in the SDA. Starting with Menominee High School, students involved with Future Business Leaders of America at MHS promoted and facilitated multiple fundraising events during a recent athletic competition, and all proceeds went to support Alzheimer's awareness. The MHS Jazz Band kicked off a night of outstanding musical performances by the band department and all of their concerts. The students in the MHS Choir performed the annual winter concert for the community, and the MHS girls team won 3 games over the recent winter break, including 2 games at their holiday tournament at MHS.
Hey, Mike, if I could just jump in real
Yeah.
quick. And Friday night in the gym, it was really neat. Mr. Karkula had the pep band there, but not only was it the high school pep band, but they also invited the middle schoolers, the 8th graders, to come and join them. So it was almost like a double section, and they were sold out and so good. It was really good. People, even the New Richmond fans were cheering for the band. It was pretty nice.
So perfect segue to the Menominee Middle School. They had their 6th, 7th, and 8th grade winter orchestra concerts, as well as the 6th or 8th grade band concerts in the gym for the winter season. And 8th grade core leaders met with their 6th grade buddies to decorate holiday cookies as well. And looking at Knapp Elementary, kindergartners worked on labeling their writing as they designed collaborative gingerbread houses. Really neat project there. 4th and 5th grade students practiced for the Battle of the Books in their library with library media integrator Jessica Graham, and staff and students participated in reindeer games at their monthly Cardinal Crew meeting, which is a great opportunity to build community at Knapp. At Oaklawn, students in Mrs. Ryder's classroom celebrated the first day of the new year playing Uno, a great way to celebrate the beginning of 2026. Students enjoyed sledding on the berm on the south side of the playground. 5th grade students developed creative pieces highlighting special words that had meaning to them, and 1st grade students were developing motor skills, hitting force, and crossing the midline in 5 working on some of those gross motor skills. River Heights, we had an awesome lead up to winter break. Students celebrated with classroom parties. It was a great opportunity to have families come into our building and celebrate with. One example of that being the kindergarten students and families. Parents were able to come in and decorate festive holiday candy trees. So they took like a sugar cone or an ice cream cone, and they were able to kind of decorate that into a holiday tree, which was really fun. And then students participated in fun team competitions during our monthly road runner rally, again, building community in our school. And then finally at Wakanda Elementary, Wakanda Stars celebrated Mr. Terry's retirement with warm smiles, chants of his name, and heartfelt thanks to many years of keeping their school clean. Kids affectionately called the cleaning machine the Zamboni, so he got to ride the Zamboni around. My kids told me all about this, it was great. So that sounded like a really cool experience. Fifth grade students were excited to receive special mail from the national parks. They have their great national parks program, and were able to get mail back from those parks that they're studying. Fifth grade students proudly earned a spot in the prestigious 30 Book Club, also a big deal for them. And the entire school enjoyed a special performance by the middle school orchestra, choir, and bands as well.
Mr. Kennedy mentioned the fifth graders at Wakanda with the national parks. They did send over a few invitations for school board members. So they were able to do an extension activity and create some invitations. So if you weren't one of the board members that got one, please share those around. And then also Mrs. Schofield dropped off a ticket for Ranger Night, which is this coming Thursday, January 15th, from 4:30 to 6 p.m. At Wakanda Elementary School. There's also a chili dinner that will be available for $5. So there's tickets for each school board member. And I know I really enjoy Ranger Night, and people from the public are welcome to come. Each student will have a table set up, and they'll have a whole spread describing the national park that they researched, and it's really good. Jay, which one did you do when you were a Wakanda fifth grader?
I did Acadia National Park.
Yeah, that's right, I remember that one. So anyway, I'll pass these around, but thanks, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you all.
All right, now we segue into our official student representative communication. So thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the school board. Happy New Year. The clubs and students at NHS are excited to share their accomplishments from before break and in the week since, as well as the plans we have for upcoming events.
Like Mr. Kennedy had mentioned before, the MHS FBLA continues to stay busy in our community. The club is proud to share that they donated $300 to the Alzheimer's Association. Funds were raised during our annual Alzheimer's Awareness event. Members baked, decorated, and sold cupcakes. Hosted an Alzheimer's Awareness booth at the December 5th boys basketball games, sold cotton candy, and held a Miracle Minute fundraiser. They are now preparing for the regional competition at St. Croix Central High School on February 7th, 2026.
The Menominee DECA chapter competed at UW Stout this weekend in District 1 competition. We want to give a huge round of applause to everyone who competed. Your hard work and professional polish represented us well. Out of the nearly 60 members, the following members placed at districts. Aiden Anderson and Max Yeager took first in sports, entertainment, and marketing. Blake Behrens and Everett Paulson took third in buying and merchandising. Grace Edinburgh took third in entrepreneurship series. Chase Pember took first in hotel and lodging management series. Rachel Riebel and Kylie Travis took second in business law and ethics. And Kira Waker and Darla Woodford took third in travel and tourism.
Academic All-State Awards were given out this past weekend at the Wisconsin Cross Country Coaches Association Clinic. The Menominee team did exceptionally well, with the boys team having an average GPA of 3.98 and the girls with a 3.91. That earned both teams a Team All-State Award, and 13 of the 14 runners also met the requirement for an individual All-State Award. The boys had the highest GPA of any D1 boys team at the state meet, which is the first time in school history that we have ever been the top academic team. In addition to the academic awards, Menominee High School was well represented in the other association awards, with Luke Ray earning District 3 Boys Runner of the Year,
Coach Craig Olson winning the District 3 Girls Coach of the Year, and Lauren McCullough with her state championship being named the Division I Girls State Runner-Up of the Year.
In addition, congratulations to the following members of the cross-country team for the following end-of-season awards. Lauren McCullough was named to the All-State First Team, Bennett Schmidt was named to the All-State Second Team, and both MHS girls and boys teams won academic All-State honors.
The Science Olympiad team finished 3rd overall this weekend in Hudson, with many students placing in the top 3 in their respective events. 14 students earned first place medals, 8 students earned second place medals, 15 students earned third place medals, and 16 students earned fourth place medals.
That is all we have for tonight. Thank you for your time.
Just a couple things. If you could please email that to Mrs. Meixel so we can get that in the record. And then Brian, I'm gonna put you on the spot on the Science Olympiad. Brian was telling me about it this morning. So 3rd place in Hudson sounds awesome, but it's really awesome when you recognize how big of a meet it was. Can you explain what you were saying, Brian, please?
So the Invitational this weekend for both middle school and high school had teams from the state of Wisconsin and Minnesota. The multi-year first place team from Minnesota was in attendance, as well as I believe Wisconsin's previous first place team. So second or third place for high school came in right behind Minnesota's winner last year for their state competition. And the same happened for the middle school.
Yeah, so it really is remarkable. Our Science Olympiad program is just top notch. So thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to give that context.
I went by the Hudson School Saturday and I couldn't figure out all those buses. The parking lot was totally packed. That's how many schools were there. And I want to just add on to the cross-country thing. We talk about their all-state stuff, but co-curricular activities are evidenced by the grade point average they have achieved, best in the state as a team. And that shows the carryover between the co-curricular activities and the excellence that they do in the classroom, because they're learning about work ethic, and that carries over to the rest of their life.
Thank you so much for being here. It's always wonderful to hear from you. Thanks. Next up, we have community communications. Because we got kind of a late start tonight, if there's anyone who wanted to speak but didn't get their form turned in, yeah, come on. Great. Thank you. So it looks like we have one speaker tonight, Mike Cooper.
Good evening and Happy New Year. And what a year it should be. This year celebrates 250 years since the writing of the Declaration of Independence and the birth of the greatest nation in history. After the Bible, it is the greatest document ever written. It is the first political document to codify the rights of man. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among them. What a truly revolutionary idea, and it has lasted 250 years. I would hope the school board grasps this unique opportunity and gives our students every chance to learn the history of this great document and the early history of this country leading up to its writing. I would suggest that you get up to speed, that you read a two-book edition, The Story of America by David and Kim Barker. Book 1 is called The Beginnings, the second is The Building of the Republic. They are very interesting, well-documented books. I would also suggest the school board create a committee of district residents to review and or create programs for the various grades sharing the history and wonders of the Declaration of America. I would be happy to volunteer time, and I would guess that there are a variety of others in the district that would do so as well. My wife bought these books a couple years back, and we just got around to reading them now. And I always thought myself to be somewhat of a history buff, especially about early American history. But these books just flat blew me away. Just the documentation and the view, that they give to the early history and the writing of the Constitution and the Declaration. And then the second book is actually more about the first 7 presidents. And again, I would recommend that if you have at all chance, that the school boards bring for a copy and maybe share it around with others. Thank you.
All right, next up, we have revenue and expenditure reports for the month end of December 2025.
So yeah, on the revenue side, the most notable movement was an increase in interest earnings and some local revenues as winter activities picked up. The state aid and levy revenue are largely timing driven and will continue to come in later in the year, so nothing here raises concerns. On the expense by object report, the main item that I wanted to talk about is apparel. As you can see, that line is over budget, but I did a little bit of research on it, and it's almost all of that is activity is in Fund 21. All of the activity is in Fund 21, not Fund 10, the general fund, and that's usually covered by fundraising, et cetera, by student groups, et cetera. In fact, 12,000 of it, there's an encumbrance for some things, so I'm not sure why it's encumbered, or basically the money is spoken for, but it hasn't quite left the account yet, so it counts that as spent. So it's not a spending issue, it's more of a budgeting question, so I could increase the apparel budget to reflect the activity, or leave it and allow it to kind of clear through and see what it's like over the next couple of months. And then by function, the report by function, spending increased across most areas, very consistent, predictable between November and December. Most functions are now in the low to mid 30% range, which is appropriate for this point in the fiscal year. So there's no functions really that stand out as either overspending or lagging significantly. So overall, month-to-month changes from November to December reflect normal seasonal activity.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments on the revenue and expenditure reports? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our monthly employment report for the month of December. This is an informational document. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on to our consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Angie, second by Abe. Tonight, we have minutes from our board meeting, a regular board meeting, December 8th, as well as our board retreat, December 8th. Financial reports, we have general fund checks totaling $2,311,458.31, and cash receipts totaling $176,806.25. We've had $1,000 for the food service donation to Food Service Angel Fund, contributed by various community members. We also, in our consent agenda tonight, have the renewal of our WIAA Girls Hockey Cooperative Agreement and an approval of the number of regular and special education spaces available for open enrollment, as was discussed at our December board meeting. Whew. Any questions or discussion on the consent agenda? All right, let's vote. That motion passes unanimously. Next up, we have the personnel consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the personnel consent agenda.
So moved.
Second, Dale.
Okay, motion by Michelle, second by Dale. Tonight we have 3 retirements on here. Did you want to say something?
I do, Rachel, thank you. We are getting to that point of the year where teachers who are gonna retire need to inform the district by January 15th. We are expecting that there could be a couple more that the board will see at the next meeting. But Rhonda Yan, fourth grade teacher at Oaklawn, Mary Ayler, social studies teacher at Menominee High School, and Michelle Christine, special education teacher at the high school, have all submitted their retirement papers. If we could vote no, that would be great. I know we joke about that every time this year, but certainly we'll miss some people who have just done a great job with our kids, and we thank them for all their years of service. It will celebrate with them when we get to the end of the school year, but just want to say thank you to them and wish them well in their retirement.
You stole my joke. Any questions or discussion on the personnel consent agenda? All right, let's vote. That motion passes unanimously. On to our action agenda. Tonight we have action to approve the SCMA Health Insurance Plan Wellness Incentives for 2026. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved, yeah.
Second. All right, motion by Dale, second by Dominique. Did you want to say something?
I do, and I know the board spent a lot of time reviewing this in December, so we don't need to go through the whole thing again. But what I want to tell you is that, we have continued to work with our staff in terms of getting feedback. It's been very positive feedback on this plan. I want to make sure to go on record, even though it's also written here, and we also said this before, this is a one-time incentive. We do think it's very important, and we feel that the way the health insurance plan is functioning, that this is something that can be done this year. However, I do think that continuing this plan is something that will be very budget dependent. Also, I think that once the structure is set up, it's very possible that we can end up using this incentive plan as a way to earn the HSA contributions that we have in our school district. That's how Dunn County does it as well. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that before you vote tonight, that this is one time, and that if it is successful, we would plan to continue it. But whether it be put into the HSA program we already have, or whether it was to continue as a different incentivized plan like it is now, is something that'll have to be determined in the future.
Any questions or discussion on the wellness incentive plan? Seeing none, let's vote. That motion passes unanimously. And then on to our discussion agenda. First up, we have a review of the 30-year capital improvement plan. Looks like we have guests ready to go.
We do, and you're all very familiar with Kevin Tomaszewski, our Director of Buildings and Grounds. He'll be presenting the Fund 46 plan, the 30-year capital improvement plan. But before doing that, I also want to introduce you to Brendan Utes. Brendan is our new Assistant Building and Grounds Director. What is this, day 6? Day 6. Brendan's been doing a great job, obviously working with Kevin and getting to know the district. He lives in Knapp, so he's a Menominee graduate, so he already knows the district, but getting to know it from an employee point of view is certainly different. But we're so happy to have Brendan as part of our team, and welcome Brendan, and Kevin, go ahead.
All right, so I have shared with you folks 2 different documents, one being an Excel spreadsheet of the 30-year plan, and then a Word document. I find it much easier to look at the Word document, we'll look at the Excel at the end. But starting out with that document, 2026 Capital Improvement Plan Update. It starts out with a table, and that is...
Could you talk into your mic a little bit more? Oh, thank you. We have one person listening on the phone, so I want to make sure we're catching it. Thank you.
So this first table is essentially a review of where the current year projects are at. We've talked about these several times, so I'm not gonna go through all of the projects. I do have a few notes after that initial table about our larger ones, so. So the bus loop over at River Heights, we have not started that project yet. Two data maintenance staff have been able to keep it going, so to speak. We're getting some cold patch from the county, you know, just getting a couple more years use out of that bus drop off. I'd like to keep this in the approved project list because I'm a little concerned about a year like this, as we see in our local communities, a lot of potholes are popping up this year. Also, still in progress is the pool project. So this project, we are to the point now where we're gonna be working with an engineering firm to get specs to put out for bidding. We just had a pool assessment completed. Brendan and I plan to meet this week and kind of go over that with a fine tooth comb, develop our list of questions for the engineers. And we're gonna set up another meeting to discuss the next steps moving forward. So those two are rather large carryover projects. Up next, the next table is the 26-27 suggested projects. And I'm basically gonna be going down this table, top to bottom, left to right. Talk a little bit about each one of the projects. So starting out with the roofing projects, we have two schools that need some attention. First up is Wakanda. We're looking to replace the roof in the original part of the building. That roof is from 1996, out of warranty, becoming problematic. And the same for the high school. The northeast corner of the building at the high school above the science wing is a 2001 roof, which is also giving us, we're getting more and more frequent leaks in those areas. Flooring projects for the district, starting out at Oak Lawn. I think we have some original carpet at this location that's getting very well worn, looking to just replace the carpet tiles similar to this room. In the music room and the connected offices. The middle school would have 5 similar spaces, offices that I believe, I forget who's in them off the top of my head. All the group numbers are listed here, and one of them is the choir room. Finally, the high school, with the amount of traffic that goes in and out of that building, the main vestibule is wearing pretty rapidly. I'd like to take that out and just put a heavier duty carpet in that area that's more designed for a vestibule, and then change out the carpet in the main office. So office area, principal's offices, back to the break room, that whole section. HVAC projects, we would like to upgrade the controller at Wakanda Elementary. Wakanda is probably the most difficult building to control temperatures and humidity levels. The installation of this controller would allow us to go between heating and cooling. Might not make a lot of sense to run a boiler in the summertime, but it really does help to drive the humidity levels down during those really high humidity times of the summer. Ceiling fans at the middle school. Here we're just simply looking to replace all the fans in the main gym and the back gym. They are failing, and I'd like to get them all matching and working properly. In addition to that, there's room 348, fax room, very tall ceilings. It's difficult to maintain temperatures in there. We think having 2 small ceiling fans that the teacher can control are gonna help maintain the temps. Moving on to sidewalks, starting at Wakanda. Going from the main parking lot to entrance number 3, which I believe is the kindergarten lane, is in poor condition. So I'd like to replace that. And then on the north side of the building, there's several sections to replace there as well. The next area is part of that bus loop that I spoke of just a minute ago at River Heights. When we do go to do the asphalt part of that project, the sidewalks, that's gonna be the right time to do the curb, sidewalk, gutter, etc. Simple blacktop maintenance. This summer, I would like to give attention to the high school. We're gonna be checking out the main lots and the field house lot, very high use lots. We need to maintain all the lines for the buses. It's kind of a big deal in the field house, and then all the student and staff parking. And the new asphalt is the River Heights bus loop. Onto boilers. Oak Lawn Elementary, we just want to rebuild one of the boilers. We bought a hairline crack in the heat exchanger, so just replacing that, not the entire boiler. Doors will be at Oak Lawn Elementary. They have one set of exterior doors in very poor condition and several others that are right behind it, so we're looking to replace those. So we're talking doors, hardware, glass, frames, everything about the exterior doors at those entrance numbers. Then at the middle school, the teaching staff had requested, similar to what we did at the field house 4 or 5 years ago with the overhead door that was cut into the wall between the field house and the weight room. Middle school would like the same type of setup from their weight room to their multi-purpose room. So that's a job that's a little more involved. They're gonna have to have an engineering stamp on it, that kind of thing, to get that going.
Kevin, can I pause you for a second? I did talk to Mr. Betcher about that project, and it's really a big supervision issue. If they were able to have an overhead door, it'd be a lot safer and easier for a teacher to supervise both areas. So right now, either the teacher has to go outside and go in the hallway from room to room, or only allow students in one room at a time. So I do, it's not a cosmetic thing, it's an operational thing, and I think it's a good improvement plan for the school.
All right, next up are plumbing projects. So starting out at Wakanda Elementary, the grease trap for the kitchen, located in the receiving area. It's a combination poly and steel tank. The steel part is rusting out. It's just to that age where I think our best bet is to pull it out and insert a new poly tank. And last but not least, Knapp Elementary, hand wash station right outside the student's restroom. The one there is quite old and needs to be replaced, similar to what we did at Old Lawn Elementary a couple of years ago. Pool improvements, I mentioned that, again, we're looking for specs from the engineering firm. We're working with an outfit out of Madison. We specialize in new pools construction and repair. They either just finished or are about to finish 10 pools from the Milwaukee School District, very similar problems to what we're having, so I feel we're good about bringing them on board and getting their input to the project. And finally, technology projects, I do have a little typo on there, it's supposed to be 26, 27, not 25, 26. But Katie and her team are looking at digital storage upgrades and tech infrastructure. So with all that said, that's the projects in a nutshell. If you want to look at the Excel sheet, we're looking at column N now, but in summary, I know it's real small print, it's $4.4 million worth of projects. But just keep in mind that that includes the carryover pool project and the River Heights bus loop. So the new projects are half of that cost. As of the start of the 26-27 fiscal year, we're estimating that we're gonna have a $10.5 million balance in the fund. And that includes that recent contribution that Eric spoke of earlier. And how everything is currently laid out in the spreadsheet, if we were to move it, it's gonna be funded until 2030, 2031 fiscal year. Questions?
With respect to the pool project, do you expect to have to bring that back to the board once you get bids, or is that kind of dependent on whether the bid comes in within the budget?
So the board, this time last year, approved a total of $2 million to take the next steps. If it looks like we're gonna need to exceed that, yes, I would come back.
And that will be dependent on what you get from them, what bid you get from them.
It'll be dependent on any surprises during state approval time and then bid results.
So scope and bidding.
Yes.
If board members are thinking of any other questions, I want to point out, we already talked about this in the budget hearing, but those roofs are a great example. You know, a typical roof would be projected about 20 years, 20, 25. You know, and you look, you know, some of these roofs have lasted us a lot longer, and that's a great job by our maintenance. You know, they've gone up there and they've patched, you know, numerous times, but it gets to the point where it's not worth it to patch anymore. And that's where Kevin uses his judgment. So we continue to stretch these capital improvement dollars as far as we can, but we also want to be cautious to the point where we're not creating problems or not able to operate, because of stretching. So it's a delicate dance.
Obviously, every year the projects are different as the needs shift. I'm curious if you've seen changes in either supply or labor costs, over the like from this time last year, like what do you see in terms of like when, as bids come in or you look for roofing supplies, like how are things changing?
That's a good question. I've never done one of these roofing projects. Well, most of the projects we've done have been a little bit smaller scale, so I really don't know how to answer those types of comparisons. Part of that though, and especially in the pool project, we have a window in the district where we don't want to disturb the sports seasons or summer school, so we have a window of March, starting in March, till June. So if we try and do that project this year, I think, yeah, we're gonna get that elevated price, that we don't wanna do it price. I think the right way to approach this is take our time developing the specs, getting those bidding numbers later in the summer, fall, giving those contractors plenty of time to bid it out.
I can answer that question, it goes up.
Any additional questions or discussion regarding the 30-year plan? This will come up back to us at our next meeting for approval of the 26-27 updates, okay, great. All right, thank you so much for being here. Next.
Yeah, we're just gonna do a little switch around. Eric's gonna get his computer set up, and then Chris can come and sit by the microphone.
The next up on our agenda is a discussion of private school voucher. Well, we're gonna have a presentation on private school voucher transparency. And we have a special guest here tonight, Chris Hombach-Boyle. As has been mentioned, she's our Northwest Wisconsin regional organizer from the Wisconsin Public Education Network. And based on our discussion in December, we have invited her here to share what she's been working on.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be here tonight. I titled this, How Did We Get Here? But I don't have to talk about that because you already did. I'm here to talk basically a lot about how the network could help, or how we could answer questions, or what your needs might be. I started this journey a long time ago. I was a teacher in the Eau Claire School District for 30 years and then ran for school board because that was about the time people thought maybe they should run for school board, and I got on. So I was the president of the board for one of our largest referendums in 2015 when I figured out that the voucher costs got shifted back to the taxpayers, and have helped write the first voucher transparency bill, and it has never had a hearing. So how many years is that now? 10 years. So I'm still at it, and I want you to know you're not alone. The network has worked really hard as a nonprofit, very fiercely nonpartisan, connecting public education and people around Wisconsin around this topic. We kicked off back in August the Transparency Project when Green Bay took 2 years to get it on their tax bill. So they were the first on the tax bill. We haven't had it happen again, but as I talk tonight, you will find out that there were a few successes in getting an insert in the last tax bill, okay? So the top 5 concerns, you've talked about all of them, maybe not the mis and disinformation piece, we'll talk about that a little bit, maybe with the privatization piece. All of these things tonight, so I'm just gonna go straight to the privatization piece, so we have time for some questions, because I know this is a long meeting, okay? I'm clicking my, so, we took all last year leading and working with Green Bay. Their story went thusly. 2 years ago, they brought it to their city council, and they had long conversations, and they tabled it. They didn't probably set up the environment richly enough to have the conversations relative to everybody kind of understanding the process of how you would do something like that. As a network, we didn't know it either. I mean, this has been brand new territory for us to figure out as we go. It's kind of like building the plane as you fly it. And so when it got tabled, they went back to their community and did a lot of education with the people in the Green Bay City proper, and people that supported public schools, and also those that had lots of questions and maybe wanted to learn more about it one way or another. We came up with the idea that, politics can be there, but it's not our problem. We need to keep the nonpartisan side, get the information out, have robust discussions, and see where it takes us. So that's, and we're pretty proud of that piece of it, okay? So we built a voucher transparency toolkit. And if you wanna click on there for me, can you do that?
The link is broken.
You
I
copy
think-
and paste the whole thing. Got it, I was just offering.
It,
You say, Peter. We'll give it a shot here. Otherwise, the board members have it, Chris.
yeah, then you can click on it. I wanna take you so that you'll be able to explore this when, sometimes you have to have it in slide mode in order for the thing to work. So it's gotta be the big picture piece.
Do any board members need the link sent to them? Everybody good?
So if you go to slide,
Here, let them- I think
because it won't click through, it won't come when you have it in that mode. There you go. So if you go down and you click on, see the red on the top there where it says learn more about the voucher and independent charter taxpayer project, just click on there, you go. So when you go here, you can scroll down and you see in the top bullet where it says transparency toolkit, click on there. And we even have a table of contents. Scroll down to, there you go. So see that little blue thing? You could scroll through this whole thing. I only want to take you to the blue one at the top. Go back to the top. There, that one, where it says how to take action. Click on there. You're good. Okay. You get to where you can have a checklist and a list of what you need to do to get the work done. Wondering where to start, get the facts, and as you scroll down, you can see who in my community already cares about this. Where do I get these answers? Put a core team together. Make it local. Understand the two different documents that are needed for this project to succeed. We started to learn how to work with the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, which is really just where you have to okay the wording on your tax bill. Identify and contact your key stakeholders. So you can see it's all here for you, written out for what you need, okay? And as a network, and as the Northwest Wisconsin organizer, I also have Camden Harsfield here tonight. He's our organizing and engagement coordinator. He lives here, so you've got in Menominee, so you've got some really closeness to the network if you have questions, okay? We can go back to the PowerPoint and to the next slide. I just hit that yellow thing on your, there you go. Should take that. There you go. Just go to the next slide, you can just hit the next one. The next one is your amount of your, and I know you mentioned 1.3 mil, right? For the total. This is what I pulled off of our tool that we have on our website that you can plug in any district on there. So Is the 1.3 mil, is that include transportation and all the additional costs?
Yeah, the figure you have there, I think, is for 24-25,
Okay,
and then
that's
the
what it is.
1.3 is for.
Is for it's now, so good, I circled that, so I'm gonna update that, okay, good. Next slide. So you have some, these are the people that have just reached in to me since Green Bay, okay? So you can see that you're not alone, and that all of these school districts have reached in one way or another to start this process. And I'm gonna tell you, two stories actually. Ashland recently, I've been working with them for several months now. They went and got their moms and they had a state representative come to a school board meeting, talk about the project. I mean, I was in the background, but you know, I didn't do much, and they had this conversation. Within the next school board meeting, they had written a resolution, which there's copies of the resolutions in here for you. And then, the superintendent went to a city council meeting, explained, this was in November, so I'm thinking, November, that's when the tax bills are due, and da-da-da. And, by the time those bills went out, they had an insert in it. So I mean, that was their story. What I'm finding in working with different communities is everybody's kind of got their own pathway and what's comfortable for them in doing this. And they're not, it's not an exact way, it's what's built within your community to support this. Does that make sense? Yeah, which I'm finding delightful, actually. Let me see if I look at any of these other ones. Eau Claire, that was different too. The end of January, their city council meeting, they took the resolution from the school board and they wrote their own, directing their city staff to have it on this coming year's tax bill. And they will vote on it at the next city council meeting at the end of January. Again, that's a little bit different way of doing it. Okay. So, the next one you can go through, because the privatization impacts, that's a link to our site that we have on that you can look up each school district and what their impact is. And I want you to know too that I can share with you the new, have you seen the new DPI mapping tools? They're amazing, right? And they're actually, I'm thinking we don't need to do ours anymore because they finally had an asking for those tools, you know, I'm asking for those tools. I usually did all the data for the Senate and Assembly districts, so if you need those, working with your legislators, I did those as well. And shared your data with joint finance, when we had joint finance, I shared every joint finance person's data with them, including the people that represented your area, so, just so you know. If you go to the next slide. So, I'm here to help. Next slide. And I just want to end with this is also in the works. With the amount that's being pulled, with all those different areas you talked about tonight, that's pulling money from your budget and that we have to go out to referendum or go out to our taxpayers to fill all those gaps and holes. The discrepancies there with what is specified in the Wisconsin Constitution are larger and bigger and got full more than anything that will allow us to have a deeper conversation about whether we're fulfilling what our Wisconsin Constitution says we should be doing for our kids. So I'm hoping too that if we work together this year, you'll be on the cutting edge of what's going on there as well. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Chris. I was looking through in the toolkit document, so like with the Green Bay example, so I read through this a while ago, but not recently, so I want to kind of like say what I'm reading and tell me if I'm interpreting correctly. So the process is something like the school board, or a process which could work or worked in Green Bay is a school board would have a resolution to the city as a municipality for the region. And then it has to go to the city council to approve tax language, and that language has to be approved by a state office.
By this Department of Revenue.
But
But they're really clued into that now.
yeah.
And also the tours are as well, because a lot of the, we connected with a lot of those, both sides, you know, in the sense of them knowing that we needed that help right away. We're gonna have a little more time now because we've got all the whole year to do it. I was doing it within 2-3 weeks, we needed to get this done, so we have a little bit more time.
Is the state office, the state local, what is it called, the local state finance office? So that's an administrative office of the Department of Revenue, right? So it doesn't have to like go through the assembly or something.
No.
Although maybe support from an assemblyman might be helpful,
Yeah, we
but
do
it's
that,
only the administrative process of that.
yeah. Right, exactly.
So the political process in terms of like elected people is the board here plus the city council working on language.
And then you work with your little birds, your little municipalities. For example, Green Bay passed theirs, but they've got also like the town of so-and-so, that, you know, you've gotta go back out and touch base with them as well.
Do they also have to approve language or is the language?
No, I don't think so. The thing of it is we did find out is that even the Department of Revenue didn't really know how to answer the question, because there aren't rules about any of this. All they have to do is okay the language. What we did do with the language is change it a little bit from Green Bay. We added the term state mandated to describe any type of voucher so that it wasn't the school district that was thought of as the originator of that, but that it was a legislative origination as a state mandate, so that taxpayers would really get that message.
In the other districts and municipalities where you're working on this, has it, and this is it's a question about the people in the process, not really about the rules, right? Has it been the case that where the municipality goes, the local townships tend to follow, or has there been?
We're kind of still into that.
Okay.
So I have to tell you the truth, I don't know. I know in Green Bay, you know, they went to the vote with the city council. They had 4 hours of debate, and it was a tie. And the mayor broke the tie, then you got it on the tax bill. They put it in the little section of notes. You can see that on the example. They were able to put the verbiage in the notes section. You would have an option if you got it on the actual tax bill where it could go. I mean, it doesn't have to go in the notes, it could go in the line, you know, depending. That was the first thing when they got my tax bill, where was the space on the tax bill, because I'm into that now, but yeah.
Nice.
And it really was not a political thing, it was a way of letting the taxpayers have transparency and the idea that they were paying for two.
So when I said political process, I didn't mean like politics in that
Yes,
sense. I meant
yeah.
politics in the sense of like, is it a bureaucratic process or a process of discussion and deliberation?
And we have not run into really anybody that thinks it shouldn't be done, really, to tell you the truth.
This is kind of following up on Abe's question, and maybe you still cannot answer this one as well. But with respect to Green Bay, and kind of at this point not knowing what the success rate will be with working with the smaller municipalities within the school district, do you think that process was right? To start with the city, which is going to be the majority of the taxpayers in the geographic school district, get that done first, and then look at the townships?
Well, I'll tell you a superior story. There was another one of my districts. They went to the county board first, see? Because that was the person who was, and that is a political position up there, so you run into some of that kind of stuff. And that didn't really work. They're back now going to the city council. But, you know, as you get into conversations with your municipalities and with your communities, I mean, Menominee might be a different pathway.
If they had had success at the county board level,
We haven't had one, we haven't gone that way yet.
sure. But if it did, it would have covered everything within the geographic district.
That's not to say that I haven't thought about the idea of the city council with a conversation already bleeding towards the county board to say this is coming your way. Like, communities that work that closely with their little entities probably will have that conversation, you know, and you probably have friends and people you know and have relationships with. Well, why don't we all do it? You know, I can see that happening, but it hasn't happened yet. You're getting on board with the first 20.
You said the Green Bay discussion was like 4 hours and it was split and the mayor, broke the tie. What was the two, opposing views?
They had school choice, Wisconsin was there as part of the conversation. We haven't had that any other place. But we have, this is how I've watched this too over 10 years as far as the migration of the whole voucher piece in our state. It's migrated from east to west. So when you look at the data over here where I am the organizer, very few independent charters, but they're coming. And I can just watch it come across the state, so, that's what it was. Jim Bender was there and the people from School Choice Wisconsin. And a lot of it was trying to pit private against public, but that wasn't the point. The point was that the taxpayers should know this. And that was it. It was, they took advantage of it, fine. It was legislated to allow them to do that. That's not a point I would even bring up. I would debate.
So just to clarify, School Choice Wisconsin was advocating against
Putting it on.
voucher transparency. And it wasn't about changing the vouchers, it was just they didn't want people to know
Ron,
how much it cost.
deduct it for yourself. We didn't even want to get into, it was pretty obvious. Truly, And when you look at the $1 billion a year now, over 10 years, that needs to happen. The other two things I want you to be aware of is the caps. There's a bill for keeping the caps on, which they come off this year. So if you're thinking about an increase relative to vouchers, they have not looked at what $1 billion a year impact will be. So that's just simple, leave them on until we figure out what that's going to mean to public schools. It hasn't gotten a hearing, and the other one is, the special ed fees. I'm sorry.
I was just curious, I don't mean to put you in an uncomfortable position, but I'm wondering, how do they articulate why they did not want to put on a tax bill? Why they didn't want the transparency? What was the details there?
It was simply that it seemed to them that we were pitting kids against kids, We were pitting educating kids against educating kids, and that wasn't the point at all. It was just a matter of being transparent on the tax bill. Especially when you start thinking about your referendums and it's being paid down, that's on your tax bill. Not everybody puts all this on their tax bill as far as referendums and stuff. They're all different across the state as well. Did you know that? I didn't. Did I answer your question?
I'm good right now, thank you. I'm good, thanks.
Go ahead. So I know the cap's coming up as to how many people, percentage-wise, it's gonna be whatever anybody wants to, is that correct?
Well, I think it is too, and I think it's other people getting into the program, like we're worried about the other schools, but also the virtual pieces. That could really bloom as well.
Also, I think I heard, I'm not sure about this, but isn't the cap coming up too, like for instance, for income? Like for
It's
instance.
pretty high already.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I
yeah.
thought so.
But not the caps. The caps is the number or the percent per district. It was a 1% increase each year until this year. Now.
Yeah, so it's only gonna get tougher for, more money.
I wish they would keep the caps on so they could figure out what the impact would be, which is why they should get that bill hearing.
Okay, and then so if a student comes in and, and they're not low income or wherever their poverty line is supposed to be, they can still get a voucher without, saying anything that makes it more.
And also you can look at the new data maps and see the percentage. If you look at the schools that are receiving vouchers and the percent of kids in their schools that are on 80-90% of their kids, you can see how that can proliferate.
Are there any more questions for Chris? And I'm not letting you off the hook quite yet, but, cause I'm gonna sort of suggest we discuss now what a next step would be for the board. And if you have thoughts on that, feel free to jump in, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so I just pulled up my tax bill. And it separates out a lot of things, which is really interesting, right? It's got, certainly it's got, SDMA, it's got Chippewa Valley Technical College, under each of those it has, some sub-items. We've got local, we've got county, we've got, the lottery credit. So there's, a whole lot of things that are broken out in a lot of detail. And I think, I think that, again, I agree with your assessment, Chris, that like, this isn't about what the education system like ought to be. It's about making sure that taxpayers actually know where money's going, right? And we are, and we don't just say like, you don't just say tax. I've got, 6 line items on there that help distinguish where things are going. And some of them are small, some of them are big, but they're all like, some people who live up by Tainter have the Tainter Lake District and things like that. So I think it is worth pursuing just in straight up like civic awareness, taxpayer advocacy, just being aware of those things. So I think it's worth looking into. I think there is some like trepidation. We want to get into a whole process that's kind of a little bit uncertain, but also when I think about our city council and our county board, even as the people on those boards change, I found both of those boards to be full of very thoughtful people who are willing to like think things through. And I think they'd be open to the conversation at least, and I'm not afraid of having that conversation. So I think it's worth at least stepping our foot into and kind of seeing where those conversations go. And see where it leads. Obviously, if the municipalities were against it for some reason, then that's how it might work out. But I think it's worth having a conversation and engaging with that question.
I would agree. I think that's very important. And this is just to give you a perspective. When I first came on the board 18 years ago, we were paying $300,000, and at that time it was only the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. So in 18 years, it's gone from 300,000 up to $1.4 million and growing. So just give you some perspective.
It does work with our goal of transparency as well. We have been working very hard at that in all areas.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Would it make sense then to have our next step be an agenda item either at our special board meeting this month or in February to start discussion on either start discussion on what a resolution would look like or identify what we want our process to be here in Menominee? And again, Chris, if you have
I think that's excellent, yeah.
yeah. Mhm. Maybe first step is about process. Maybe we would have a discussion item about process that would presumably lead to the next agenda item being resolution drafting. Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I agree. I think that's not put it off, let's do it on our next meeting in January.
I have not looked at what's on the docket for January, but it seems like that's something we can add. Great.
It would be nice to have a specific corresponding spot on the website that has information about that, so that eventually taxpayers could be directed to that. But in the meantime, if we're talking to officials, if we're talking to the city council or to the county board, they also have a quick spot that gathers some of these resources and information to explain what the why behind it and what other people have done. If there's a tight spot on the website to make that easy to find.
I can comment on that. Green Bay, if you go to their website, they have a gorgeous place now for taxpayers to interpret their tax bill. It's wonderfully done. You could fashion yours exactly like theirs. And they're not the only one. We've got another district that just did one too. I don't have remember which one it is, but you've got some prototypes now to look at and then to make your own.
That's a great idea, and I wanna look at that, and I also wonder if in the meantime, you know, I know you had a, piece in school crossings about tax bills. I wonder if there could be a blog post specifically about that. With the interest that in the short term, you know, if one of us is chatting with a city council member or town clerk.
I just posted Washburn, they put it out on their social media,
Nice.
so you can, I mean, then those are all there with the network, or you can go on it. I foresee districts kind of now building relationships. I've wanted forever the idea that this was a collective, and I think people are feeling more comfortable now in doing that, so I can connect you to all those things.
That's wonderful, thanks. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to phrase what I was gonna say. I think something that would be helpful when we get to that point, like I was just looking at my tax bill, and I can imagine exactly where you have the line, right? And just the side by side, well, this is what the tax bill looks like now, we'd like it to have this extra line, and that's really the difference, right?
It could be that simple.
Yeah, it can be that simple. And it's like, oh, that makes sense, you know, just seeing a line item to describe what a portion of something is. I was thinking about what you're talking about, Joe, earlier in the mid-year budget here, and I think these mid-year budget meetings are fantastic, really going through those details and thinking that through. And one thing I think we have, well, 2 years ago kind of struggled with was really communicating how the school revenue is used and like what it means and what we, what is it for, you know, that's some big questions. I think this can be an opportunity to have those conversations at a moment where we're not in a financial crisis and establish some understanding and trust in the community. So that if, you know, you're talking about, you know, 2031, things are going to start getting tight, right? In all sorts of ways, and having conversations about school revenue, where it comes from, where it goes. This is a good excuse to have those conversations regardless.
Great. So we have a lot to think about. But the next step, we'll have a discussion item at our next meeting and start to map out some steps. Would it make sense to ask Joe in the meantime to, I don't exactly know what, but start to put together some thoughts or some roadmap, I guess.
I guess that was my question, and it was kind of to Amber's point. You know, the school crossings column that I did really talked about the tax levy and then broke it out by revenue limit, state aid, private school vouchers, and changing property values. Certainly that could be pointed to, but it already has gotten a little buried because we've had another update since then. It's not on the homepage. I don't know if simply bumping that back up to the homepage would be sufficient, or if you actually are suggesting that we create a separate web page right away. We can do whatever. I guess I'd be interested to see what the board would prefer.
That might be something to include in our discussion.
Okay.
In 2 weeks. You know, on a gut level, my thought was that creating something like what Green Bay has, that's the only one I've really looked closely at so far, will take time. And we should probably do that, but then in the meantime, if we wanted something that was a reference point, a simpler way to get a reference point to easily link to our website could be a blog post.
Can I make a comment too about the resolutions? We've had districts now do different kinds of resolutions. For example, Washburn included, even though you couldn't put that on your tax bill, they pay a lot to transport kids from Washburn to Ashland, okay? And so they put their $50-some thousand for their little budget on their resolution. Not that it did any good, but it educated the community about that additional amount. Superior, they're different because their voucher school that closed is totally special ed, so it's all IEPs. So they wrote their a resolution with a 2-year amount on it as opposed to one, you know, that sort of, so you can customize it to what your needs would be. But to get it on your website to explain it to taxpayers, when I read those and districts do those, that's really great explanation.
So maybe in 2 weeks, people could take a look at Washburn, Green Bay, and then in 2 weeks, kind of figure out the next step for Menominee.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Dan.
My question goes back to what you said earlier about going to the city council or to the county board. What if one of the outlying communities or townships rejects it?
That piece now, we've been talking about how that adds additional work, and the sense that you're breaking these all out for the fiscal person for the school district. Green Bay now just pulled on 2 of their townships, so we're just doing that for the first time. So yeah, if they don't, then you don't put it on the tax bill.
Put it on any of the tax bills or just for that township?
Just for that township. That's
So
what I'm thinking, yeah.
So in a school district such as Menominee's, right, where we have the city and then we have 11 other municipalities, is that right? It would be potentially 1 by 1, and if we started with the city, that's the big block. And then, you know, we could start with the larger towns, but not, you know, Menominee teacher. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and the townships usually are just, you know, it's a very small, board, and they usually are very focused on the operational details, right? So I think, just thinking through like how our county operates and the pretty close integration between the townships and the county and the city, I don't anticipate that being a huge barrier. You know, it's a process. It's something that's going to slow down the process, but I don't think it'd be a barrier or something.
No, I got my questions answered. Thank you.
All right, final thoughts, questions, or discussion? I assume, that Chris is constantly available for us if we have additional questions, if something comes up. I know that she's always been very responsive, so we're really, really grateful to have you here tonight.
I'm grateful for Menominee, thank you.
All right, if we are ready to move on to our next agenda item, we will review the annual audit report.
Okay, so the board every year at this time gets to see the audit report. Like similar years, or like past years, it's very similar. Eric and his team have done a great job. The board, as you know, reviews finances every month. Eric, maybe you want to point out a couple things and open up for questions, but there really are no surprises. It was a very good, clean audit.
Yeah, no surprises, a clean audit. One of the things that were pointed out, and again, this is the same items that were identified as last year, the segregation of duties. It's a common finding in the district our size, and it's just one of those things where, you know, staffing can only be so large. Yeah, the segregation of duties things was on there. The financial statement adjustments, all the audit proposed entries were made during the audit process, so those were fixed. And then internal controls, so auditors did not identify any material weakness or compliance issues with internal controls and things like that. So in short, it was a clean audit.
Questions or discussion? I know everybody read all 176 pages of the audit material. Go ahead.
I would like to point out, and I apologize for Amy and other board members who have heard this multiple times, but the segregation of duties finding, I think it's really important. One is that we acknowledge that there are findings, but Eric, and especially with Eric being newer, I asked him to reach out to the auditors to confirm what I say. And the auditors confirmed that yes, that is a finding that is pretty much universal. And what I can tell you is that in terms of segregation of duties in Menominee, so I've worked as a superintendent in Cassville, I worked as a superintendent in Cadott, and now 12 years in Menominee. We have more oversight in Menominee, almost double, well, more than double compared to Cassville. We have very good oversight, we do have good segregation of duties, but the fact of the matter is, unless we hire about 3 or 4 more people here at the ASC, there are gonna be some people that do multiple duties. Ideally, in a perfect world, every financial person would only be doing one duty. We don't have the resources for that, the auditors understand that, and like Eric said, that's following across schools all across the country. But at the same time, that is an area that could be stronger, but I think our internal processes make it as strong as it can be with our resources.
Wonderful. So does anyone have questions pertaining to any of the audit documents, the audit process? I can't remember, you did this last year as well, or did you come in?
I came in October, so I was here for this portion of it, but I was not involved in the audit for last year.
Well, congratulations on getting through the process
Thank you.
from start to finish. I know that it is, I'm vaguely aware of how much work goes into it on your part, and that's enough, and I'm grateful for you. Thank you. All right, if there's no additional questions or discussion, we will move on. Continue with Eric in the hot seat tonight with the 2025-26 budget revisions.
So yeah, I presented these budget revisions, not very large changes, it's just more of a, we usually do 3 or 4 of these budget revisions a year. And so just making these small changes in Fund 10 with, moving around some money for co-curricular activities and vocational curriculum and things like that. And then Fund 80, moving, I think those were coded incorrectly. There was a budget placed in the 160,000 series, and so putting that into the appropriate account code for that.
I had a question about the special education fund. Can you explain that, because we have an increase in one line and a decrease in the other, can you just?
Yeah, so I believe that was, so in that 430,000 account code, that was for a grant that we no longer received, and the expenses were there. The expenses were too many expenses were placed in there, so then the rest of it was just placed into the normal special education spending.
Got it, that makes sense.
I don't have a question, but this is very easy to read. And it's, I really like that, and I just want to commend you on that, even if you are a Yankees fan.
Thank you.
You like easy to read financial statements. Additional questions or discussion on the budget revisions? Great, thank you. Next up, we will get an update of work completed by the Downsville Building Exploratory Committee.
So Rachel, Brian Segwin is going to take this one. As the board knows, one of the goals of the district work plan this year was to form a committee to study possibilities for the vacant Downsville school building. Brian has chaired that committee, and what, we had 3 meetings, Brian? 4 meetings? Why don't you go ahead and take it away?
All right, well, thank you. So first, I do want to thank the board for, realizing that, taking a look at, some options and engaging the community and what those options might be for the Downsville school site, I think was welcomed and very, thoughtful on the part of the board. It was a very enjoyable process. We had a committee of 14 very engaged and committed members, not just from the Downsville community, but from the community as a whole that participated in this process. So to, kind of refresh and bring the board up to speed since our last update. As indicated in the beginning, the committee met 4 times, between September, October, November, and December. The committee's goal was to make some recommendations back to you as a board on some options from an instructional standpoint for use at that site. We began by looking at the district's strategic plan that was adopted this last summer and approved to take a look at what needs were identified as part of that process. The committee felt that that was a very important starting point, and there were a lot of comments about how detailed that plan was and helped them to really look at the needs in our community as a starting point. Along with that background information, the committee spent time, had, I think, very insightful and thoughtful discussions around what our current enrollment and student makeup of the district was. And they spent a lot of time with that. That really was all of our September meeting and part of our October meeting. That then led the committee into some in-depth conversation around what would some potential solutions for those needs that were identified as part of that strategic planning process be. And then really October into November, looking at some potential educational uses as well as types of school spaces that could then look like. And then we wrapped up by taking a tour of the site as well to take a look at how those potential ideas fit within the space on that. So ultimately what the committee came up with was not one, but what they thought were 3 potential uses for that site from an instructional standpoint. One of them, and these aren't necessarily in rank order, but one of them was a site that would focus on career and 21st century readiness, really taking a look at what it means to be work and life ready, and really with kind of a nod to project-based learning. Another need that was identified was that of early childhood and family support, taking a look at really 3-year-old on up through potentially 5K, which may or may not have a school that would serve all of those needs. But then when we also talk about solutions beyond like a partial day program, so daycare and those types of things, opportunities there. And then the third programming option is identified as unique programming, taking a look at program offerings around whether it would be environmental education, the arts, agriculture, or alternative learning environments for non-traditional learners, some type of alt-ed setting. The committee had a lot of conversation around all 3 of these and spent a lot of time looking at examples of schools throughout Wisconsin and Minnesota and some as far away as Arizona that are centered around each of these types of structures. Throughout that conversation, the committee was not at a point where they felt that they could make a recommendation of one or the other from a consensus standpoint, not from a standpoint where there was disagreement across which one there was a need for, but more so from a standpoint of, well, they themselves as an individual might have a high priority for one of these. They saw equal value in the other ones. And felt that ultimately it was something that needed to come back to the board level to help provide some direction on possible next steps beyond this initial discussion, but really, a little more broad from community input as well as to whether or not there was support from the community as a whole, not just the Downsville community, but the school district as a whole. to move forward and support not only in concept, but then also recognizing that there are financial expenditures that go along with programming such as this, and whether or not the community would be supportive of that. And you know, coming to the conclusion that this committee of 14, you know, didn't have the ability to ultimately make that decision. So where that landed, the committee was you know, recommending that the board consider collecting additional feedback from the community to help prioritize which one or ones or multiple of these, if any, might be feasible. And you know, as we reached that conclusion as a committee, ultimately made the decision to, for the time being, to pause the meeting schedule. And initially we planned on meeting up through December and then making some recommendations back to the board at this point. So got to this point, and then committee members, while all of them identified that they felt it was worthwhile to be part of the conversations up to this point, depending on what direction the board wants to go, the committee as a whole feels that you know, some, depending on the direction, some of them may be well suited to continue with this work, and some of them, again, depending on the direction, next step, it might be prudent to have some other people with more background in that type of instructional setting step onto a team at that point in time. So that gets us up to this point. You know, ultimately, there are some next steps, and Joe will probably take the next steps after this. So I'm happy to answer any questions that get us up to this point, kind of as we move forward, and kind of go from there.
And that's what I was gonna suggest, see if there's questions first.
Yeah, I'm curious, so on these three kind of branches of possible focuses, right? Period 21st century readiness, early childhood education, family support, and then unique instructional programming. I think I have a pretty good vision of what early childhood education, family support can look like in that sort of like building and location. I'm curious if there were, you said you're kind of looking at different case studies across the country. Were there examples of what sorts of like career readiness things have worked elsewhere? Or the thing that strikes me about all three of these is that they all are an attempt to kind of, in some sense, like bring in either a new population of students or clients, and in a way that maybe like is a little bit outside the standard kind of curriculum, right? And so I'm curious, like, you know, what are there 4 examples of career readiness that we discussed and kind of thought were at least interesting, if not compelling? Yeah, you know, when you take a look at really you know, that type of model, you know, whether it be something, you know, in the STEM or the STEAM area, and there are several different examples of that, whether that would be focusing in on more of a survey method of having, you know, a handful of different opportunities for students. There was one school that the committee looked at where it really centered in on, you know, and within the area of STEAM, it was taking a look at like drones, taking a look at evolving technologies and what it looks like to go with that. The committee also spent time in looking at career preparation within the trades. So there were some examples that they dug into with that, whether it would be residential construction, HVAC, some of those pieces. So that was, you know, really, you know, where they started to look in, and then the conversation kind of went to the next step of, you know, do we have a student population to fill a school like that? And then it started to branch. Well, what's not available within our district? What's not available in other districts as a potential draw? Yeah, exactly. That question, like, what population do you draw in? Yeah. And then the question was the what if. Is there enough of a regional draw to support that, recognizing that we may not have that within our own district? Were there examples of, you know, I think there's a lot of different things there from like kind of, yeah, the drones and kind of the computing and tech into trades, construction, et cetera, lots of different things. The thing that's unique about Downsville is that it's a pretty big space, and it's, you know, set apart. And if there's particular, you know, career readiness that benefits from having a unique space that you go to, you know, something that is getting, you know, tight or constrained in a high school environment that can be, you know, translocated or built out if only there were, you know, something the size of a gym, for example, right? Or a large outdoor area, right? So there's, I think, the uniqueness of the space is really a big factor in what would be successful.
Did the committee explore at all potential partnerships for any of these kind of three buckets of possibilities? You know, specifically to that first one, the career 21st century readiness, I wonder if UW South would be excited to have such a program happening in the community and put any resources towards it, I guess.
So, one of the representatives that was on the committee is a representative from UW Stout. And their responsibility or their role as being part of team was to be, one, part of the conversation of what ifs and possibilities. But then if we got to a point of going in any one of the directions, and Stout, you know, specifically when we looked at 21st century skills in career readiness, and then early childhood, those were two areas that you know, Stout has some background in. There was no commitment as part of these discussions to say, yes, we would commit to doing this or commit to doing that. Up to this point, it's committing to being part of the conversation and you know, really moving from there.
Yeah, and so it does seem like there's an openness to being part of that from the part of Stout, at least.
I would say there's an interest in learning more about what the options would be and what the fit might be.
Yeah, and then I should have also asked about CBTC. Was there any connection there with that committee, or have you had any conversations with anyone there?
So there was not representatives from CBTC that were on the committee. We do have several current partnerships with CBTC. You know, so not being able to speak directly to whether or not, you know, there's an openness or a willingness, but CBTC has continued to be a strong partner in taking a look at where they can help us meet a need that we're not yet able to fill has kind of been their partnership up to this point.
Rachel, to that point, I do want to mention, I think I might have mentioned it at the time, I did have a meeting with the chancellor and her team last spring after it was determined that Downsville would close. And the chancellor was certainly interested. Even in that meeting, there certainly seemed to be some barriers in terms of potential draw and location. However, if and when there was a decision, whether it be, I think early childhood was one that Stout talked about potentially having capacity to partner, and then the career readiness piece. So I think there's possibility there if there was a way to make it feasible.
The risk of being Debbie Downer. I just think that we should at least keep it in the back of our minds that so much has changed since we did close Downsville. And we have school districts all around us closing buildings, enrollments tanking, and we aren't sure financially what reopening Downsville, what would happen financially with that, or if we know. I just think we have to keep it in the back of our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that is I think that's kind of implicit in all the conversations and questions we've been having is a successful use of that building would require some sort of partnership or a new, like, public-private or institution-to-institution partnership that does something new, which hasn't been tried here yet. And that going back to kind of like regular programming is not going to be successful with the population. So it's got to be something, if there's a chance for success, it's got to be something that draws in a new population of students, whether younger or older or of different backgrounds we haven't been able to serve before. It'll be tricky to figure out. I personally think the question on the page, like that, it's worth digging a bit deeper to see if there is any traction there. Maybe there's not, but I don't think we should, stop looking, while we have the opportunity to look, because the longer the building sits, the more those opportunities are gonna pass us by. And we know that, for example, our budget for maintenance is gonna get tighter and tighter and tighter. So while the building is in good shape and it's still being, looked after and kept, from decaying, we have a bit of time to figure out if there's a use, that could be building a partnership. Maybe there's not, but I think it's worth looking personally.
I agree with what Abe said. I also very well take Michelle's point into that, and I'm curious if there are resources available to help us get a sense of whether we might hope to see, to kind of reverse our open enrollment numbers, if one of these possibilities was implemented. In other words, like we currently have a net open enrollment out of like negative 123-ish, is that am I right? Somewhere in there, right, when you sort of add in our ins and outs, and if we had programming that drew students in, and what that would look like to our total enrollment, and what that would mean for our budget 5, 10, 15 years down the line.
Like Michelle prefaced, I hate to sound like Debbie Downer as well. What I would say is that no matter which ideas come up with, some of the same challenges of why Downsville closed in the first place are still going to be there. The fact that there isn't enrollment within proximity of that building, number one. And then the location being so far south of town, number two. If the board was to want to look at additional instructional methods or opportunities in an attempt to try to gain enrollment, trying to team that with where the Downsville building is at, I think is problematic. And I do think that the committee itself, Brian, if I understand, they were a little misunderstanding in terms of finances available at that point too, weren't they?
So at the beginning, there was, I will not say a universal understanding of the finances associated with operating a building. And also, the understanding initially, and we spent some time talking through this, on the front end of, when the building closed, the cost associated with operating that building didn't just simply sit in a bucket waiting for the building to operate again. Those funds followed the students into the other buildings. Once that was revisited and established, one of the early questions that the committee had was, so how do we fund this? And I was able to talk through with the committee, and the committee was able to come to the realization that, one, there would be a financial cost to any programming that happened there that would have to be determined. Now, the committee had the benefit of not needing to solve that problem, but, and that was one of our earlier updates back to the board, was to take a look at what would some possibilities be. And that was a piece that they were excited about, but also, I think, looking back at the discussions, also very mindful of that it didn't necessarily matter what solution or possible solution it came up with as far as instructional programming, there would be some decisions that would have to be made related to, how do you fund that programming.
So with that being said, I guess just a couple more things to add. We did look at capacity, and right now our schools are operating really at an ideal capacity. Yeah, there could be maybe some rebalancing at some point if needed, but realistically, we're really at a sweet spot when it comes to capacity. So unless we are drawing from the outside, we would be taking students from buildings that we are at really optimal capacity, and then adding another site, which would then be operating under capacity, so that needs to be considered. The other thing is that all three of these ideas that the committee came up with are terrific, and I could see all three of them being successful. Whether or not they can be successful on their own, I guess is a real doubt that I have, as a standalone item. Because like when we think about career planning or career opportunities, the idea of removing students, like let's say from Menominee High School, because they're gonna dedicate themselves to a different instructional approach at a separate site, and then they're gonna sacrifice some of the other opportunities that they have at the high school because of the proximity. You know, they're not gonna be able to walk across the street or, you know, or walk to Stout or have a 1-minute ride or whatever. I see that as a huge barrier. And then obviously with the early childhood, the location of where the enrollment would come from are issues. Excuse me. To Rachel's point about the open enrollment, and we've talked about this, we have studied open enrollment, and most of our open enrollment issues really are based on geography. You know, people living, we have such a big district geographically, and people living on the edges with family connections outside the area, or parents that are working, you know, in the Eau Claire area and choosing to have their kids go to school where they work. I'm not saying that this couldn't help with open enrollment, but we'll also have to think about the competition and what you're competing against in terms of Wildlands and some of these other places that are already established, or the virtual piece, which is very well established as well. So I'm not trying to say that it's not possible, but I do know that we experienced the language immersion idea, what was that, 6-7 years ago as well? Great idea to have a language immersion school. Well, when it actually came time to look at how many families would actually take their children out of their neighborhood elementary school to go to a separate site for language immersion, there was really very minimal interest. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we're gonna try to do two things at once, occupy a vacant site that's out of town and establish innovative programming, I think we'd be asking ourselves to thread a needle that is very small.
That is true. On things like the, 3K to kind of pre-K site though, I kind of wonder, like, is that, I'm thinking of the building as a resource as opposed to like the programming that the district would offer. I mean, there could be, I don't know what this means, how this would work legally in terms of what the school's allowed to do in terms of financing. But in terms of like offering a space for lease and partnerships to other private entities, I don't know if that's even available to us. But I could imagine like inviting the CBTC to have some sort of site there that we help facilitate as a district and get revenue from, but it's actually their program that's happening, not ours, right? So I don't know the legality of those sort of partnerships, but I think things like that aren't even about like our students, but about how the district can contribute to the overall educational community of the area are worth considering also.
And I know one of the goals of the board too was to try to be supportive of Downsville as a community, as part of our school district. I do think if we pivot away from, like the task of this committee was really instruction focused. I think if we pivot more and look more at building use and potential partnerships and those types of opportunities, I think the needle becomes much bigger and easier to thread. But if we're focused on instruction, I think it's gonna be awfully difficult.
I think we need to loop back to the community and see what they would be supportive of. I think that these are some great ideas and that, the task was to come up with some great ideas without money being a factor. And we all know that this is, any path we move forward is not gonna be easy and it's gonna be stressful financially. We don't have a not stressful financial path to pick. But if we put these options out and asked, what people would be supportive, asked to rank them, asked to collect possible resources that we're not even thinking of, like if it was arts, there's an amazing Potter a block away. There might be things that we could capture by asking that would give us important information about what to focus on and how to put numbers to that plan. if there's one that is heading away that people are excited about, then we could run the financials on that and see what we're actually looking at, see if it's doable, see what that would mean. But I think until we find out what would make the people excited, then it doesn't make sense to put a price tag on it yet.
Amber, when you talk about, sorry, Michelle, when you talk about finding out what make people excited, are you talking about these three ideas with instruction, or are you talking about expanding them more?
I was imagining we could ask 4 ideas, you know, we could put these out, or say, what if we're looking at renting the space and using that as a resource? And just, there's so much conversation about this, but it didn't really have a focus, and emotions were really high, and it was a rough time during the time of Downsville closing. And I think with a little bit of space and a little bit of thinking about the possibilities, people might be in a clearer position to be creative and be supportive. And if we phrase the questions correctly, we find out important things that are not just, do you want one of these 3 options? We could find out the direction that people are leaning or where they're identifying a gap, things that might be helpful in marketing towards open enrollment, trying to get some students from outside to come there if we decide to go instructional.
How is that different though than what, I'm sorry, Michelle, but I don't wanna let that, how is that different than what the committee has already done, right? Because that committee had an open call to the community. These 14 people joined, and I mean, it seemed like it was pretty open to start with. Like, how is what you're describing different from that?
I think at that point, there could have been 300 possibilities. You know, it could have been the farm school with all the guinea pigs and animals that actually live on a farm that aren't guinea pigs. But like, there were so many things that I think the research that the group did and focused it down and looked at those options gives a little more structure to what might make sense for that building.
Okay, go ahead now, please.
My turn. Okay, so I just wanna make it clear that my goal wasn't to articulate that I didn't think we should stop, we should continue digging. I just think that we need to make sure we're keeping that in the back of our head, that we're not over-promising something that we don't know yet if we can pay for. Maybe we can, maybe it will bring in, maybe we can come up with some ideas that will bring in a lot of people. However, I just think it needs to be on our radar.
I really like what you both just said. I do think, when we look at the kind of possible next steps for the board, it seems like a lot of people are moving toward this middle further study. And the further study has 2 bullet points. One is to direct our admin team to study the possible financial impacts and the possible kind of institutional impacts, right? Am I reading that right? And the second is to gauge community support. I would be nervous about gauging community support for things that we might not fiscally be able to do at this stage. So I guess I'm leaning more toward getting more information about, I guess to me it's two parts, right? What are the financial impacts of any of these things? And also like, what could any of them do to enhance the programming that we currently have and sort of like get a sense of those numbers? If we were doing an early childhood program, how many students currently in the district would move there, right? And obviously there's a lot of guesswork. I'm not asking you to have your crystal ball, but I think those 2 things would be interesting to know from my perspective.
I agree, I just think it's a huge lift to figure out a clear path and the financial implications of multiple pathways. So that's why my inclination would be to find out what's the top dream and then put a price tag on it. I get what you're saying, that would be my top choice too, but it does feel like a really intensive project that by the time we got to the end of it, all the numbers would have changed again.
You know, one thing Amber said, and again, I hate being Debbie Downer on this thing, but when you were saying that all of them are financially at risk, or I can't remember exactly how you said it, the option that's not is to not have instruction down there. And again, I hate to say it because everyone loves that community. I do too. But when I look at what's happening, when I look at state funding, when I look at enrollment, demographics, I just don't see it. So we can make all the plans and proposals and projections that the board wants, but unless we're going to commit, you know, $750,000 a year for something that it's going to be expensive.
But can we say no to it without even knowing that number?
I'm gonna do something crazy and agree with Joe.
I want to copy the tape.
I think if you want a school open today, like, it has to stay open. I've never believed that, like, it was possible to reopen Downsville when it closed. That if we wanted it to be open and needed to stay there, like, schools are closing everywhere, like, we're not hearing about communities like ours that are starting new schools. So to me, it will not become a school again unless there is a very, like, intentional focus by a large group of people that want it to be open and are energized and believe in it beyond a doubt. And, like, there's nothing but doubt in this room, in this government. Like, and so to do all the projections and things, it's a little hard for me to feel like, to ask admin to do that. I think maybe there's room in the sort of unique programming of it being something different. Where maybe we're in sort of more of a leasing situation. And I like the idea of it potentially being an early childhood spot or an alternative school, but, like, there's no way that's gonna happen if there's, like, not already, like, a deep desire for us to have that thing in our community, and so we're gonna make it happen. But it's not gonna just, like, happen because we kind of planned it. Like, I just don't think that's possible.
Have we circled back at all with the Downsville families just to check in with them on how they're feeling now, how the transition is and that kind of thing?
Other than Brian's work in the committee, I would say no. Brian, is there anything else beyond that, the committee?
Not formally, you know, informally, I know our principals are mindful of how the students have assimilated into the other elementary schools and the experience that they're having. But as far as specific outreach to the families, I don't believe, you know, this happened.
You know, in talking about this, it's not about trying to, like, pick winners or losers or sides or anything like that. It's just really just trying to be real, you know, and then, you know, the question I get now is, what about NAP? You know, and I really think NAP is a great school, but I also know that the way enrollment's going, it's gonna get tougher and tougher with NAP even, and I don't see any immediate change, but anything that we do to create something new that potentially takes more kids out of our other schools will impact those schools, including a school like NAP.
To me, the question about Downsville isn't about, it's not, I'm not even thinking about it in terms of like a question of a school enrollment. I'm thinking about it as the district as a property owner and as a functional piece of a broader community. How can we facilitate, how can we use the resource we have, which is a building and with, in excellent condition with grounds, and serve the broader mission of the district as a partnership between taxpayers, the community, et cetera, and kind of broaden the scope from saying, let's not, I think it is clear based on enrollment numbers, thinking of Downsville as Downsville School is maybe that time has passed, but thinking about the Downsville building as something that can be part of a broader ecosystem of how our community operates, there's a lot there. And when I think about what I want to think about in terms of financial projections, like, what will that building be doing in, 5 years from now, right? There's lots of options from nothing to a vibrant community center doing all sorts of activities which are not about K-5 education at all. They're about other things that happen in the community, perhaps. And what would those outcomes look like in terms of both revenue or partnerships that the district has developed, along with whether the district is part of that or whether it's like being passed on to the entity. Like there's a whole world of options there. If we think about not it being a school, but it being a functional part of a community with all different ages and interests and activities going on. If I start kind of thinking that way, like galaxy brain, about what that building could be, there's tons of really interesting options out there which might have dramatically different financial perspectives than we've been kind of focused on, revenue per student and enrollment numbers and who lives within a 5-mile radius and all these questions we think about it as a school. But when you think about it as part of Dunn County, I think there might be a lot more options out there.
And Abe, I think that nails exactly what I've been trying to say. I think if the board gives us permission to expand this investigation a little bit further, and certainly I know the board doesn't want to do anything that the Downsville community, excuse me, is not interested in. But there are so many opportunities, and if we think about the needs of society, and I'm not saying I'm leaning towards this, but whether we're talking about some sort of daycare, early childhood, whatever, all the way up to healthcare needs, housing needs, especially when we start talking about how our population is aging, and especially in the rural areas, there's a real limitation on care facilities and things like that. I'm not saying I want to turn Downsville School into a care facility, but I think there's things like that if we expand our scope beyond instruction, I think there's a lot better chance that we can find something that might be beneficial to our community in Downsville.
I really like the conversation where it's going with, looking at broader ideas and so forth. This is just an idea I thought of, but could you actually open it up to some partner that might want to rent the building, and then we could use it, and then we have revenue from, the rent of the building. Otherwise, if we don't do anything with it, as we say, eventually, we're gonna have to do something with it before it's, things start happening with the roof and the rotting and the, whole bit if it's not occupied. So to me, I think it's really good to look towards maybe doing something different like that to help us out, because you're right, as hard as I like to say this, that, the idea that there's no money is realistic. I'm sorry to say it's realistic, but it is realistic, so that'd be my thoughts.
Gail, go ahead.
God, I think Joe just nailed it when he was using the word needs of the community. I think our discussion up to now has been what opportunities exist, what kinds of things might we do. The list of 3 is very good, and there's probably others, but I think unless it's a need, it's not going to be successful.
To clarify, do you think the needs of the community were outside of the scope of what the board had asked of the committee?
I think the committee was limited to instruction. And well, I think the community would desire to have an elementary school there. I think it's already been determined that that's not gonna be successful. And I think some good instructional ideas came forward, but I don't know that I would consider those to be needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's noteworthy that there was not a option presented here from the committee that said, K-5 community school, right? Like, I don't think that was on the plate to anyone, but. So is what you're talking about then, the board asking our administration to come forward with a new set of possibilities that would think outside of the instructional realm? Is that right? Is that?
I think that makes a lot of sense. That have the investigation continue, but broaden the scope beyond limiting it to instruction.
And what I would add is probably the closest foray into that discussion that the committee had was when the discussion around early childhood and family support was taking place about opportunities, and I would use the term a perceived need, because the committee, didn't conduct the research to see whether or not it was substantiated, but a perceived need around that idea for daycare or before school care, not before the school day, but before school care. But they did stall on conversation of, was that location matched to where an area of need was? So we went back to focusing on instructional possibilities within the PK-12 realm.
I think, something that would make more sense, sorry, I have like 5 thoughts, I'm trying to put it in one sentence. Joe brought up the nap thing. I mean, we just were really on the same page, apparently tonight, but, I teach some kids from nap, and so I think about it from time to time, and I know there's a lot of concern about the future of nap. And to me, some of these thoughts of, like having a school being like a magnet school for agriculture or something, like now would be the time to look at, can NAP evolve into one of those that would help maybe draw in open enrollment or help keep people there? I think now is the time for that discussion for NAP. So, maybe stealing this hard work to put down to a committee, to something else, but like, this makes sense to try to help preserve a school that we already have. And I do like the idea about exploring what the other uses for the building are.
So it sounds like the board wants to hear an exploration of other uses for the building, maybe as a next step. Yeah, does anyone? Yeah, Emily, sorry, have you got anything you wanna chime in from the phone there?
I would echo what Dominique just said too, and what, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it'd be, for the sake of transparency and having collaborative feedback from the community, if we could expand it a bit, instead of just having, like you had mentioned before, the instructional focus, I think it would be a good idea. And I mean, that's what we've been doing too as a board, is trying to build those relationships and maintain them. So yeah, I'm open to that, no objections for me.
Thank you.
I also wanna, like say thank you to the committee, cause I feel bad, cause it's like, we're like, hey, can you explore what it would look like to have Downsville open as a school again, and then also none of that, and figure out something else. But also, I think that's sort of just how the process works, but thank you for the work that they have done.
And I don't wanna speak for any one member of the committee themselves, but collectively, at the end of the process, the committee recognized that a outcome of this work might be going in a direction other than one of these three. But they felt it was important to, go through and honor that task of identifying some potential instructional solutions that, they identified as potential needs. Not to say that there aren't ways that the district is meeting those needs currently, but would there be another way to do that? So.
And I know we've been here for almost 3 hours, but I don't want to get lost what Dominique said. And this is not, this is not a, you pat my back, this is not quid pro quo. No, but in all seriousness, I hope we're not adding to this year's work plan, but it's not gonna be long that we are gonna be talking about next year's work plan. And our strategic plan, we have yearly goals. Maybe jot that down somewhere or log it in the brain. When we get to the work plan for 26, 27, if and when the board wants us to start looking at other opportunities, that might be a good work plan item.
You mean for now?
Yes.
Okay. For Downsville, do you need more information or instruction from us now?
No, and the Downsville piece is part of this year's work plan, and I think fully this is just massaging that goal a little bit, which I think is very appropriate, and we'll continue to work on it. Maybe what we'll do is work on, that's a good point. We are gonna be doing our work plan update coming up at the end of January, and what we'll do is under the Downsville item, we can add some progress, what's been discussed, and then also the recommendation that the goal be modified to reflect what was discussed here tonight.
And then in terms of working on that, like, do you want any more information or direction from us right now?
No, I think in 2 weeks, we can, give us a little time how we would think the goal could be modified, and then maybe we can give you kind of like a little bit of an action plan timeline for the next steps.
Okay. Final thoughts, or discussion. My computer keeps shutting now. But, any final thoughts or discussion on Downsville? All right, next up we have clerk's report on the 2026 school board election. Madam Clerk, take it away.
All right. Sorry, I was writing notes. There are 5 candidates who are registered to run for school board in the April 7th, 2026 spring election. There was a drawing of lots to determine the ballot order on last Friday. And so the resulting ballot order for April 7th is Dale Dahlke, Jay Edinburgh, Amy Riddle Swanson, Joseph Eliason, and Josie Pilton. No primary.
Questions or discussion on the clerk's report on the 2026 school board election? Thanks to our board members who are willing to do this again. All right, items related to next meeting dates, board committees, and reports. As has been mentioned multiple times, Ranger Night is coming up this week. It is my favorite thing to go to. That doesn't involve my own personal children. January 19th, we have a professional development day for staff, no school for students. The WASB State Education Convention is coming up January 21st to 23rd. Our Health and Medical Committee meeting happens during that time.
I'm not gonna be in Milwaukee, but I'm gonna be in Montana.
Great. I should be able to attend the health committee if you wanna just include me on the email. And our special school board meeting is January 26th. Any questions or discussion related to next meeting dates, board committees, and reports?
2 things. One, board members who are going to the state convention, Jenny sent out itinerary information today. Also, yeah, she did a great job lining stuff up. Also, this week, I will be sending you a message about networking opportunities that are available. Usually we try to get together at least once, kind of for an evening debrief. Also, I'll be preparing a Google Doc to track the different sessions and stuff we go to, so that we have a report back to the board, after the convention's over with. And then lastly, just wanna give a shout out to Amy, anniversary tomorrow. Happy anniversary.
25 years.
And happy, and happy birthday to Samantha Hoyt as well.
Okay, 25 years.